In an age defined by comfort, one man chose chaos. A man who refused to watch the future happen. He wanted to build it. His name is Elon Musk. Born in Pretoria, South Africa, he spent his childhood lost in books and dreams. Science fiction became his religion, imagination his escape. While other kids played outside, Elon built rockets out of scrap metal and coded his first game at 12. He didn't just ask why, he asked why not yet. From the dust of apartheid to the heart of Silicon Valley, he carried one belief, that humanity should aim higher. First, he rewired the internet with PayPal. Then he set his eyes on the sky and beyond. SpaceX was his rebellion against gravity itself, a company no one believed in except him. Tesla became his bet that electric could be thrilling and that sustainability could outshine oil. He risked everything, slept on factory floors, and stared bankruptcy in the face more than once. To the world, he looked reckless. To history, he might look inevitable. Because Musk didn't just build companies, he built symbols of human defiance, of technological faith, of obsession turned empire. Today, he controls rockets that land themselves, cars that drive themselves, and networks that reach the edge of space. He has been called a genius, a villain, a savior, and a fool, sometimes all in the same week. But behind the headlines, behind the chaos and controversy, lies a deeper question. What drives a man to risk everything, again and again, just to push the world forward? This is the story of Elon Musk, the dreamer who refused to stop dreaming, the billionaire who bets against the impossible, and the man determined to move humanity beyond Earth itself. Welcome to Richie Rich Stories. The jacaranda trees bloomed violet against the cloudless South African sky as the Pretoria afternoon settled into golden stillness. Through the half-open windows of the Musk family home in Waterkloof, the dry, high-veiled breeze carried distant sounds of children playing cricket in the street, leather on willow, muffled voices calling runs. Inside, where ceiling fans stirred the warm air, 10-year-old Elon sat cross-legged on his bedroom floor, surrounded by stacks of science fiction novels, technical manuals, and scattered components. The room was his sanctuary, a fortress built of Asimov's Foundation series and Heinlein paperbacks with cracked spines. Diagrams torn from electronics magazines papered one-wall systems, circuits, possibilities. His fingers, already nimble from hours of private practice, moved deliberately across the keyboard of his prized possession. A Commodore VIC-20 computer, its green phosphor display casting an ethereal glow across his serious face. Elon, his mother Maya called from the kitchen, dinner in 20 minutes. He acknowledged with a non-committal sound, never taking his eyes from the screen where lines of basic code scrolled in his latest creation. The Commodore had arrived 6 months earlier, ordered from abroad at considerable expense. While other boys in his Pretoria neighborhood kicked soccer balls or rode bikes in packs, Elon retreated inward, building worlds of his own design, pixel by pixel. Born on June 28, 1971, Elon Reeve Musk had always been different, quiet, introspective, with an almost unnerving ability to absorb information. His mother May, a Canadian-born model and dietitian with elegant features and practical resilience, watched her firstborn with a mixture of pride and concern. His father, Errol, an electromechanical engineer whose technical books lined the study shelves, saw in Elon a reflection of his own analytical mind. The family occupied a comfortable space in Pretoria's social landscape, upper middle class, with the privileges that entailed an apartheid-era South Africa. But the Musk home contained its own weather systems, unpredictable fronts of tension that Elon learned to navigate early. By 1979, when he was 8, his parents' marriage had dissolved. The divorce left emotional fault lines that would shape his view of relationships for decades to come. That evening at dinner, as the family gathered around the table, Elon, his younger brother Kimball, and sister Tosca May studied her eldest son's distracted expression. "Where are you tonight?" she asked gently, passing him a serving bowl. "I'm thinking about the game," Elon replied, his voice soft but precise. "I've almost finished the code. It's about space battles." Kimball, a year younger and more sociable, rolled his eyes good-naturedly. always in your head, Elon. What will you call this one? May asked, maintaining the conversation. Blastar, Elon replied without hesitation. The player has to destroy alien freighters carrying hydrogen bombs. Later that night, when the house had quieted, Elon returned to his bedroom desk. The amber glow of his desk lamp pooled around the computer as he worked, testing and refining his creation. The programming language was rudimentary by later standards, but to the 12-year-old boy, it was a universe of pure logic, a realm where rules made sense and outcomes were predictable, unlike the complex emotional equations of family life. Outside, Pretoria slept under apartheid's uneasy peace, segregated neighborhoods, police checkpoints, the distant rumblings of a society built on institutionalized inequality. Inside the Musk home, transistors and code offered an alternative reality, one where merit mattered more than birth, where cleverness could rewrite the rules. Bryanston High's corridors echoed with the controlled chaos of changing periods. Elon, 13 and rail-thin, kept his eyes down as he navigated the crush of bodies. His armload of books, physics, mathematics, computer science, formed a barrier between himself and the world of adolescent social hierarchies. "Hey, Musk," a voice called from behind, "still playing with your little computer?" He didn't turn around. Experience had taught him that engagement only prolonged these encounters. The bullying had started early, his quiet intensity, his vocabulary that seemed transported from technical manuals, his reluctance to participate in rugby, the national obsession. All marked him as different in a culture that demanded conformity. That afternoon, in the school library, another refuge, he lost himself in an issue of Popular Electronics that had arrived months after its publication date. Import restrictions and international sanctions against the apartheid regime meant such materials trickled in sporadically. He devoured the articles, mentally converting dollars to rand, calculating what components might be available locally. "You're always reading," the librarian observed as she shelved books nearby. Unlike many adults who found Elon's intensity unsettling, she appreciated his curiosity. "There's a lot to learn," he replied simply. "And what will you do with all this knowledge?" He considered the question. Build things, better things. By 14, Elon had transferred to Pretoria Boys High School, a more academically rigorous institution with imposing colonial architecture and traditions dating back to year 19 and 1. The atmosphere remained chilly for a boy who preferred physics problems to rugby scrums, but the library was better stocked, the science labs more equipped. In the evenings, he often retreated to his father's home workshop, a space of organized chaos, smelling of machine oil and solder. Here, Elon Musk's technical expertise created a rare point of connection between father and son. They spoke the shared language of engineering, of problems solved methodically, of systems optimized. "Look at how this circuit integrates," Errol would explain, tracing a finger along a diagram. "Everything connects, everything has purpose." These moments provided a template for problem solving that would define Elon's approach to business decades later, reduce complex systems to their fundamental principles, then rebuild them from the ground up. But the workshop sessions couldn't bridge the deeper emotional distance. What Elon would later describe as his father's volatility cast long shadows across these technical exchanges. The real breakthrough came in 1983. Elon was 12, his Blastar game complete, a space shooter with enough novel elements to catch the attention of a PC magazine. When they published the code and sent him a check for approximately 500 rand, about $500 at the time, a critical circuit closed in his understanding of the world. He sat at the kitchen table, holding the check, studying it with the same intensity he brought to circuit diagrams. "I wrote this once," he explained to Kimball, who had wandered in looking for a snack, "but they're paying me for every copy they sell." Kimball shrugged, more interested in the refrigerator's contents than economics. But Elon was having an epiphany. Code, unlike physical labor, could scale. The same effort that earned payment once could generate income repeatedly. It was pure leverage, the kind of asymmetric advantage that appealed deeply to a mind trained on efficiency and force multiplication. The lesson crystallized further when, at 16, he attempted door-to-door sales. The rejection was immediate and personal. Each no required the same investment of time and emotional resilience as a yes, with diminishing returns. After a disheartening series of doors closed in his face, he abandoned the enterprise. "People are harder to predict than programs," he told his mother that evening. "Is that so terrible?" May asked. He considered the question with his characteristic deliberation. "It's inefficient." By 1988, as he approached his 18th birthday, the question of what came after high school loomed like a gathering storm. For young white South African men, military service was compulsory. At least 2 years in an army enforcing apartheid policies he found increasingly difficult to justify intellectually. The South Africa of his youth was changing, albeit slowly. P.W. Botha's government maintained the architecture of segregation, but international pressure mounted. Sanctions tightened. The rand weakened. In the Musk household, discussions about the future had an urgency sharpened by political reality. "There are more opportunities elsewhere," May observed one evening. Her Canadian citizenship offered a possible path for her children. Elon nodded, paging through university brochures that had arrived by mail. "North America has better technology programs." The decision crystallized gradually. South Africa, with its political constraints and limited technology sector, couldn't accommodate the scale of his ambitions. He had absorbed the speculative futures of Asimov and Heinlein, internalized their vision of humanity's potential. The narrow streets of Pretoria, with their jacaranda blossoms and colonial ghosts, felt increasingly confining. One evening, as sunset painted the Highveld in copper and gold, Elon sat in the family garden, Pretoria boys' high homework temporarily set aside. The evening air carried the scent of dust and distant eucalyptus. A technical manual lay open on his lap, but his gaze had drifted to the darkening sky where the first stars were becoming visible. His sister Tosca, 14 and perceptive beyond her years, settled beside him on the garden bench. "You're thinking about leaving," she said, not a question. "There's more out there," he replied, gesturing vaguely toward the horizon. "What will you build?" she asked. He considered the question with the same intensity he brought to engineering problems. Something important, something that matters on a planetary scale. She nodded, accepting this as entirely reasonable, with the faith of a younger sibling who had grown up in the shadow of her brother's certainties. That night, in the quiet of his room, with the VIC-20 long since replaced by more sophisticated equipment, Elon made notes in a journal: calculations, possibilities, the outline of a path forward. Canada first, with its Commonwealth connections and his mother's citizenship. Then America, where technology was advancing fastest. Universities with strong physics and engineering programs. He was 17, thin and serious-eyed, standing at the edge of childhood's end. Behind him lay the jacaranda-lined streets of Pretoria, the technical library of his father's home, the bullies of Bryanston and Pretoria Boys High. Before him stretched a future he could only partially glimpse, one he was determined to bend toward his emerging vision. As sleep finally claimed him, the phosphor glow of his computer screen illuminated the room lines of code, a language he had mastered early. A first tool in what would become a lifetime of building. Outside, the South African night deepened toward dawn, stars wheeling over a country he was already preparing to leave behind. The northern wind cut through Elon's thin jacket as he trudged back to his modest lodgings in Kingston. Canadian winter had a particular quality, a silence beneath the howl, a crystalline purity in the air that burned his lungs. He had come to prefer this pain to comfort. At 19, he had already crossed continents and shed skins, leaving behind the jacaranda-lined streets of Pretoria for something harder, something that would test him. The small room he rented near Queen's University was Spartan: a bed, a desk, a chair. No decorations, no indulgences. Just books, notebooks filled with calculations, and a bank statement he checked more often than he'd admit to anyone. The growing number represented freedom, possibility, velocity away from his past, toward something undefined but magnificent. Elon set his backpack down and rubbed his raw red hands together. Another day at the boiler room cleaning job, another 18 Canadian dollars per hour. The grime had worked its way so deeply into his skin that a single shower wouldn't remove it. He had grown accustomed to the feeling coal dust in the creases of his palms, a particular burn on his forearms from where the protective gear ended. Minimum effort went into his appearance. Maximum effort went into the accumulation of capital. "You're home," said Todd, his roommate, sprawled on the couch with an economics textbook. "There's leftover pasta if you want it." "Thanks," Elon replied, though food was secondary. He moved to his desk, pulled out his notebook, and began to write. The day's labor was merely fuel for night's imagination: solar arrays, electric vehicles, the colonization of Mars. While classmates partied, he calculated compound interest and sketched rockets. In the bathroom, he scrubbed at the blackened half-moons under his fingernails. The mirror reflected a lean face, hollowed by purpose rather than poverty. Though he lived like a monk, it was strategy, not circumstance. The Canadian dollars flowing into his account represented something more valuable than comfort. They were rocket fuel for what came next. The morning light filtered through thin curtains as Elon sat in the campus library, surrounded by books on physics and economics. Queen's University offered him something South Africa couldn't: a bridge to America. His mother's Canadian citizenship had made this first migration possible. The next would require more. Justine Wilson slid into the seat across from him, her blonde hair falling across one eye as she set down her coffee. Their relationship was new but intense. She recognized something in him that others missed. "You missed the party last night," she said, her voice literary, measured. "I was working." "The boiler room again?" "No, lumber mill. Weekend shift pays extra." His voice was matter-of-fact. He didn't romanticize labor, he quantified it. Hours exchanged for dollars, dollars transmuted into potential energy. Justine studied him, her writer's eye cataloging details. "Most people work to live. You work like you're building something." "I am." He looked up from his textbook. "Everything is capital, money, knowledge, relationships. I'm just being efficient." She smiled, both charmed and slightly unsettled by his clarity. "Is that why you're double majoring? Economics and physics don't usually go together." "They do if you're solving the right problems." His pen tapped against the table. "The problems worth solving exist at the intersection." "And what problems are those?" Elon hesitated. He had learned that speaking about interplanetary colonization and the electrification of transport tended to create a certain look in people's eyes. The same look that had followed him through childhood in South Africa, marking him as different, making him a target. But Justine wasn't most people. Sustainable energy, space exploration, the internet. He said it plainly, as if discussing weekend plans rather than the redirection of human civilization. Justine didn't laugh or dismiss him. She nodded slowly. "You think big. Someone has to." Summer 1990 found Elon in a remote corner of Saskatchewan, his hands calloused from farm work. The endless wheat fields stretched to the horizon, rippling like a golden ocean under the prairie sky. He had taken the most physically demanding job he could find, testing himself against the elements. In the bunkhouse after 14-hour days, while other seasonal workers collapsed into exhausted sleep, Elon read by flashlight. Science fiction wasn't escape for him. It was research. Asimov, Heinlein, Clarke. They didn't write fantasies but blueprints, provisional patents for the future he intended to build. The farm owner, a weathered man named Hargrove, found him there one night. "Most city boys quit by now," he said, leaning against the doorframe. "What keeps you going, son?" Elon looked up from his book. "I'm saving." "For what? College is expensive, but not kill yourself in the field's expensive." "Not just college. I need starting capital." Hargrove laughed, a dry sound like wheat husks rustling. "Starting capital? You talk like a banker, not a field hand." "I won't be a field hand forever." There was no arrogance in the statement, just the same factual tone he might use to describe the weather. "No, I don't expect you will." Hargrove studied him with new interest. "Where you from originally?" "That accent isn't Canadian." "South Africa." "Long way from home." Elon closed his book. "Home is a variable, not a constant." The older man nodded slowly. Well, variable or constant, you're still on at 5 tomorrow. Get some sleep, Musk. After Hargrove left, Elon returned to his book, but his mind drifted. The distance between Saskatchewan and Silicon Valley couldn't be measured in miles alone. There were borders to cross, degrees to acquire, capital to accumulate. But he was patient. He had calculated the cost of every hour, every decision, every relationship. The path was clear, if long. The British Columbia lumber mill smelled of pine sap and sawdust. Elon had moved west with a fall, chasing higher wages between semesters. The repetitive work lifting, stacking, the constant scream of industrial saws created a white noise that allowed his mind to wander and plan. During lunch breaks he sat apart, sketching ideas in a notebook, while other workers played cards or napped. The foreman, McTavish, noticed. "What are you always writing in that book of yours?" he asked one day, sitting heavily on the bench beside Elon. "Just ideas." "For what?" Elon hesitated. "A payment system. For the internet." McTavish's face wrinkled in confusion. "The what now?" "The internet. Computer networks that will connect everyone, eventually. And you're figuring that out while stacking 2x4s. There was no mockery in the question, just genuine curiosity. "The work here is temporary. The thinking is permanent." McTavish nodded slowly. "My father worked these mills. His father too. Nothing temporary about it for us." "Different paths." "Different paths," McTavish agreed. "Though I have to wonder why someone thinking about computer, whatever you called, it is out here breaking his back instead of in some university lab." "Money," Elon said simply. "I need to build up enough to take the next step. This pays well for the hours." The older man studied him. "You know, most immigrants I meet are running from something. You seem like you're running toward something." Elon almost smiled. "Exactly." Back at Queen's for the winter semester, Elon found the academic environment both useful and constraining. The courses provided structure and credentials, but the real education happened in his independent research. The university computer labs became his second home, where he explored emerging technologies and refined his understanding of what would be possible in the coming decades. One evening, as snow fell silently outside, Justine found him there, hunched over a terminal. "I brought you dinner," she said, setting down a sandwich wrapped in paper, "since you were about to miss it, again." "Thanks." He didn't look up immediately, finishing a line of code before turning to her. "What are you working on that's more important than food?" She perched on the edge of the desk, genuinely interested, trying to understand how banking networks function. "The infrastructure is inefficient, built on old protocols." Justine unwrapped her own sandwich. "And that matters because money is information, and information wants to move freely." He finally took a bite of food, as if suddenly remembering his body's requirements. The next century will be about removing friction from systems, financial systems, energy systems, transportation systems. "You always talk about the future like you've already been there." "I read," he said simply. "Science fiction." "Applied science fiction." She laughed. "Is that what we're doing, applying fiction to reality?" Every technology starts as a story someone tells about what might be possible. His eyes met hers, intense and earnest. "The difference is whether you close the book and forget it, or close the book and build it." In that moment, Justine saw what had drawn her to him, not just his intensity or intelligence, but his absolute refusal to accept limitations that others took for granted. "You know," she said carefully, "most people would call that naivety. Most people aren't trying to change the world. And you are. Someone has to." The same phrase again, delivered with the same matter-of-fact certainty. Spring brought the mud season to Kingston, and with it, a restlessness Elon couldn't shake. His second year at Queen's was ending, and decisions loomed. The University of Pennsylvania had accepted his transfer application, another step closer to the American ecosystem where his ambitions would eventually find soil. He stood on the shores of Lake Ontario, watching ice floes drift and fracture in the distance. 2 years earlier, He had arrived in Canada with little more than determination and his mother's citizenship to ease the way. Now, he had savings, credentials, a network beginning to form, and a clearer vision of the path forward. "I heard you're leaving," said Professor Dalhousie, who had taken an interest in the unusual South African student with dual interests in physics and economics. The older man joined him at the railing overlooking the water. "Transferring to Penn," Elon confirmed. "The States, then. That was always the plan. Part of it." The professor nodded. "Your term paper on ultracapacitors and energy storage was quite something. Not typical undergraduate work." "Thank you. I mention it because I wonder if you're selling yourself short, focusing on the business side. You have a gift for physics." Elon turned to face his professor. "I don't see them as separate domains. The business creates resources to apply the physics." Dalhousie considered this. "An integrated approach. Unusual, but I see the logic." He paused. "Will you come back to Canada?" "Probably not. The center of gravity for what I want to do is in the United States." "And what is it you want to do, ultimately? You've been rather vague about your ambitions." For once, Elon didn't self-censor. Perhaps as a parting gift to the man who had supported his unconventional approach, he would offer the unvarnished truth. "I want to solve sustainable energy. I want to make humanity a multi-planetary species, and I want to evolve the internet into something that connects all human knowledge and commerce." He expected the usual polite skepticism. Instead, Dalhousie laughed, not mockingly, but with genuine delight. "Well," the professor said, "at least you're not thinking small." On his last night in Kingston, Elon packed efficiently, reducing his possessions to what would fit in 2 suitcases. The Spartan room looked almost exactly as it had when he arrived. He had left no mark, taken no route. Justine sat on the bed, watching him. "Will he come visit me in Philadelphia?" he asked, not looking up from his methodical packing. "Is that what you want?" He paused, then met her eyes. "Yes." Their relationship existed in a space neither had fully defined. Part intellectual partnership, part romantic connection. She understood his mind in ways few others attempted, seeing past the awkward exterior to the ambition beneath. "Then I will," she said. "But Elon, promise me something." "What do you want?" "Don't forget to live while you're building your future." He almost dismissed the concern, but stopped himself. "I'm not forgetting to live, I'm living differently. The constraints I accept now create freedom later." "Freedom for what?" "To build at scale." He sat beside her. "These years, the boiler rooms, the lumber mills, the farm work, they're not punishment, they're proof." "Proof of what?" "That I can do whatever is necessary." His voice was quiet but certain, no matter how uncomfortable or difficult. Justine took his hand, tracing the calluses that manual labor had left there. "I believe you can. I just don't want discomfort to become your only mode of existence." "It won't be." He squeezed her hand gently. "But right now, it's useful." The Greyhound bus pulled away from Kingston in the pale light of dawn. Elon watched the limestone buildings of Queen's University recede through the window, mentally cataloguing what the Canadian chapter of his life had provided: work experience, academic credentials, a bank account with carefully accumulated savings, and the beginnings of a network that included Justine. More importantly, it had reinforced a core belief that physical hardship was a temporary state to be leveraged, not avoided. The very discomfort that would drive most people to seek easier paths had become his competitive advantage. He could endure what others wouldn't, could delay gratification longer, could reduce his existence to the essentials while keeping his mind fixed on the horizon. As the bus crossed the border into upstate New York, Elon felt no nostalgia, only a cool assessment of progress against plan. Canada had been a stepping stone, useful but temporary. Ahead lay Philadelphia, then California, where the real work would begin. He opened a dog-eared paperback, Heinlein's "The Moon is a Harsh Mistress," and began to read. In his mind, it wasn't fiction but a manual, a case study in what humanity could accomplish on a new frontier. The distance between what was and what could be seemed to him not an unbridgeable gap, but a series of calculations, a set of problems awaiting the right solver. The bus hummed beneath him, carrying him south toward the next phase. In his pocket was a worn Canadian $5 bill he would keep as a reminder, not of sentimentality, but of methodology. The journey from South African schoolboy to whatever came next would not be linear or comfortable. But discomfort, he had learned, was not to be feared. It was to be used. The Philadelphia rain tapped against the windows of the rented Victorian house, a syncopated rhythm that matched the distant thump of bass from the improvised nightclub in the living room below. Elon Musk stood at the second-floor window, watching droplets trace paths down the glass while calculating the night's take in his head. Cover charges multiplied by head count, minus beer costs, minus the DJ's fee. The year was 1993, and the 22-year-old South African transplant had turned the sprawling off-campus house into a functional business proposition. Students from Penn crowded the makeshift dance floor downstairs, grooving to house music while plastic cups of cheap beer changed hands. The economics was straightforward: maximize bodies through the door, minimize overhead, keep the neighbors just happy enough not to call the authorities. "We're at capacity," said Adia Ressi, Elon's roommate and fellow entrepreneur, appearing beside him. "The fire marshal would have a stroke." Elon nodded, his gaze drifting to the calculations in his head rather than the scene below. "That's 150 at $5 each. 750 gross for the night. Minus the kegs, cups, and the guy spinning records," Adair reminded him. "Still clearing about 400, Elon replied. "Not bad for a Wednesday." The nightclub operation wasn't glamorous, but it paid the rent and represented something more significant to Elon: a testbed for business fundamentals. While his fellow Wharton students debated case studies in sterile classrooms, Musk was running real-time experiments in cash flow, customer acquisition, and operational logistics. During daylight hours, Musk navigated the dual streams of his education at the University of Pennsylvania: economics at the prestigious Wharton School and physics at the College of Arts and Sciences. The combination wasn't common. Most students chose either the business track or the science path. But for Elon, the synthesis made perfect sense. Economics gave him the language of markets and money. Physics provided the foundational rules of reality itself. Professor Robert Meister's voice echoed through the high-ceilinged physics lecture hall, discussing the principles of thermodynamics while chalk dust spiraled in the morning light. Elon sat near the front, his notebook filling with equations and annotations that bridged between the professor's explanation and his own extrapolations. "Energy cannot be created or destroyed," Meister explained, "only transformed from one form to another." Later that afternoon, in Wharton's McNeil building, Professor Jeremy Wright paced before a whiteboard covered with supply and demand curves. Explaining market equilibrium to a room of future investment bankers and management consultants in pressed khakis and Oxford shirts. "Resources flow to their most valued use," Wright said, "when markets are efficient." Between these two worlds, the immutable laws of physics and the human-created systems of economics, Elon found a framework forming in his mind. Both disciplines sought to describe fundamental rules governing complex systems. Both relied on mathematical modeling. Both could be reduced to first principles. That evening, back at the house, Elon typed code on his computer while his roommates prepared for another party. The green text glowed on the black screen as he refined a small program he was developing, a simple inventory management system for the nightclub operation, keeping track of beer supplies, cups, and projecting attendance based on weather, day of week, and campus events. "You're missing the party," said Kimball, Elon's younger brother who had followed him to Philadelphia from Canada. "I'll be down in a bit," Elon replied without looking away from the screen. "Just finishing something." The something wasn't merely inventory management. It was the beginning of a pattern, using software to solve efficiency problems, applying computational thinking to business challenges. The principles would later manifest in Zip2 and PayPal, but here in the rented house near campus, they were taking root in a much humbler form. Winter settled over Philadelphia in 1994, steam rising from grates in the street, the city's industrial skeleton visible beneath its modern veneer. In the computer lab on campus, Elon explored the early internet through Mosaic, one of the first graphical web browsers. The World Wide Web was in its infancy, but Elon recognized immediately what many others did not. This wasn't merely a communications platform, but a transformation of information economics. It changes everything, he explained to his fellow Wharton student Peter Thiel over coffee at the campus center. The internet eliminates geography. Distribution costs approach zero. Thiel, intense and analytical, nodded. Creative destruction, Schumpeter would approve. But it's not just about destroying old models, Elon continued. It's about building entirely new ones that couldn't exist before. Their conversations often ran this way. Theoretical frameworks applied to emerging technologies, possibilities mapped against constraints. While many of their classmates focused on landing interviews with Goldman Sachs or McKinsey, Elon and a small circle of like-minded students were anticipating how the nascent digital landscape would reshape commerce itself. Elon's academic performance was strong, but unspectacular. He excelled in subjects that captured his interest and did the minimum necessary in those that didn't. What set him apart wasn't grades, but the intensity with which he pursued independent learning. The library became a second home, where he consumed textbooks on rocketry, renewable energy, and computer science, subjects beyond his formal studies. "You don't need to wait for someone to teach you," he told Kimball one evening as they walked along Locust Walk, the main pedestrian thoroughfare through Penn's campus. "The books are all there. The information exists. The only constraint is how much time you're willing to invest." Spring 1995 brought acceptance letters and decisions. Elon had applied to Stanford's PhD program in applied physics, seeing it as the next logical step in his education. The acceptance arrived with an offer of financial support, validation of his unconventional educational path. "Stanford," Kimball said, impressed. "California, that's where everything is happening." Elon nodded, staring at the letter. Silicon Valley. The term was becoming increasingly familiar. Netscape was preparing to go public. Venture capital was flowing into internet startups. The digital gold rush was beginning, and Stanford sat at its epicenter. In May, Elon graduated from Penn with dual bachelor's degrees, a BS in economics from Wharton and a BA in physics. The ceremony passed without particular distinction. Elon was already focused on what came next. Palo Alto greeted him with eucalyptus-scented air and golden California sunshine that seemed a world away from Philadelphia's industrial grit. He found an apartment near the Stanford campus, prepared for doctoral study, and attended orientation. The Applied Physics Department occupied a modernist building of concrete and glass, home to specialized laboratories and faculty advancing research in semiconductors, lasers, and materials science. On his second day at Stanford, Elon sat beneath a palm tree on campus, watching students traverse the quad. The internet boom was accelerating. Netscape's initial public offering was scheduled for August. What would happen in the 5 years it would take to complete a PhD? What opportunities might be missed? That evening, he called his academic advisor and requested a leave of absence. The conversation was brief. He would defer, not withdraw, keeping options open while pursuing something more immediate. The next morning, instead of attending classes, Elon began drafting a business plan. The University Cafe on University Avenue became his impromptu office. Elon claimed a corner table, laptop open, legal pad filled with notes and diagrams. The cafe hummed with the energy of Silicon Valley in 1995. Venture capitalists meeting founders, engineers sketching user interfaces on napkins, recruiters quietly poaching talent. "We need to help businesses get online," Elon explained to his brother, who had joined him in California. "Most companies don't understand what's coming. They need a presence on the internet, but they don't know how to create one." Kimball nodded, stirring his coffee. "And we build that for them. Not just build it. We create a platform that makes it simple. A directory with maps, contact information, product listings." Elon sketched on the legal pad. Yellow pages for the internet age. The idea that would become Zip2 was taking shape. Elon worked with growing intensity, coding through nights, his sleep schedule collapsing into brief naps when exhaustion demanded. The 80-hour workweek became his minimum standard, often stretching to 100 hours or more. When Kimball expressed concern about the pace, Elon was dismissive. "Do you know the odds against a startup succeeding?" he asked. "If other people are working 40-hour weeks and you're working 100-hour weeks, you'll achieve in 4 months what takes them a year." The logic was straightforward, almost mathematical in its simplicity. Input more hours, produce more output. Yet behind this calculus lay something deeper, a profound impatience, a sense that time was a resource being squandered by conventional approaches. In the fall of 1995, Elon and Kimball scraped together funds from their own savings and small investments from angel investors. They rented a small office in Palo Alto, little more than a converted closet, and launched Global Link Information Network, later renamed Zip2. The Stanford deferral had become an effective withdrawal. The PhD that had seemed the logical next step now appeared a luxury he couldn't afford. Not in money, but in time. The internet wasn't waiting for academic credentials. The brothers established a pattern that would become familiar over the decades. Elon handled technical development, coding the platform and designing the system's architecture. Kimball managed business operations and sales, convincing newspaper companies that their future required digital transformation. Late one evening, as they worked in the tiny office space, Elon paused from his coding and looked at the whiteboard where they had mapped their strategy. "We're going to have to live here," he said matter-of-factly. "The rent on the apartment is an unnecessary expense." Kimball looked up, uncertain if his brother was serious. He was. They moved sleeping bags into the office, showered at a local gym, and ate the cheapest food they could find. Every dollar not spent on survival went into the business. The asceticism wasn't merely financial necessity. It was a badge of commitment, a signal to themselves and potential investors that they would sacrifice comfort for the company's success. As 1995 drew to a close, Elon sat alone in the office late one night, the blue glow of the monitor illuminating his face. The business was gaining traction, small contracts with local newspapers, promising discussions with larger media companies. But growth required capital, and raising significant investment would mean relinquishing some control. He thought back to the decision to leave Stanford after just 2 days. Had it been impulsive, the PhD program offered prestige, connections, and structured learning. The startup path offered none of these, only uncertainty, exhaustion, and the possibility of failure. Yet in those months since leaving the program, he had built something from nothing, had learned through direct experience the lessons of product development, customer acquisition, and operational efficiency. He had compressed years of business education into months of practical application. The rain began to fall outside, gentle against the windows, reminding him of those nights watching over the improvised nightclub in Philadelphia. From renting rooms to strangers to building digital infrastructure for businesses, the scale had changed, but the fundamentals remained. Identify needs, create systems, maximize efficiency. In the quiet of the office, with his sleeping bag rolled in the corner, Elon returned to the code on his screen. Stanford would have taught him physics, the rules governing matter and energy. But here, in the early days of the internet revolution, he was learning to build systems that would shape how information flowed through the modern world. The University of Pennsylvania had given him dual foundations in economics and physics. Now he was synthesizing them into something new, something that couldn't be taught in any classroom. The rain continued, steady against the glass, as Elon worked through the night, building the future one line of code at a time. Palo Alto, 1995. The sky hung low and golden over University Avenue as Elon Musk stood before the small office space above a local bookstore, keys dangling between his fingers. At 24, he possessed an unusual intensity. Dark eyes that seemed to calculate probabilities with each blink, fingers that couldn't stay still, a mind that refused to power down. "This is it, Kimball," he said to his brother, who stood beside him with an easy smile that contrasted with Elon's perpetual tension. "Global Link Information Network begins here." Kimball nodded, scanning the modest second-floor space with its water-stained ceiling tiles and buzzing fluorescent lights. Doesn't look like much. It won't matter what it looks like, Elon replied, moving toward a desk he'd purchased second-hand. The code is what matters. The brothers had arrived in Silicon Valley with little more than ambition and a business plan. The internet was still a frontier dial-up modem screeching into existence each night across America, Netscape Navigator opening digital windows into a text-heavy world. Newspaper publishers only beginning to wonder if this World Wide Web might actually threaten their classified ad revenues someday. Elon set up his computer, fingers immediately finding the keyboard. Outside, the peninsular evening settled into its rhythm, cars rolling toward homes in Menlo Park and Mountain View, engineers gathering in coffee houses to sketch database schemas on napkins, venture capitalists finishing dinners where they spoke of burn rates and pre-revenue valuations with increasing comfort. "We're going to build the yellow pages for the internet," Elon explained to the small team they'd assembled in those first weeks. He spoke quickly, as if the words couldn't keep pace with his thoughts. Every business, every address, every map, all online, all accessible. We'll sell it to newspapers so they can offer it to their readers. By night, Elon wrote code endless stretches of it. The office became a second home, then his only home. Pizza boxes stacked beside emptied cans of Jolt Cola, the programmer's fuel of choice with its double caffeine promise. He slept under his desk some nights, rising with the same clothes he'd worn the day before, eyes red but mind racing with new solutions. The company, soon renamed Zip2, began to find traction. Newspapers, initially skeptical of the internet's permanence, saw potential in offering their readers electronic city guides. A few signed on, then more. The staff grew from 5 to 15. The computers multiplied. The whiteboards filled with database architecture diagrams and sales projections. One evening in early 1996, Kimball found his brother staring out the window at the darkening Palo Alto streets, an unusual stillness about him. "We need money to scale," Elon said without turning. "Angel investments aren't enough anymore." "I've been talking to some venture capitalists," Kimball replied. "There's interest." Elon nodded slowly. "They'll want changes." The venture capital came first, a small round, then a larger one. More Davidale Ventures led the investment, millions flowing into Zip2's accounts. The team expanded rapidly. The office moved to a larger space, then larger still. Elon's code formed the backbone of the platform serving dozens of newspaper clients across the country. But as Kimball had observed once, money always came with strings. "The board wants to meet," said Rich Sorkin, one of the new executives brought in by the investors. Tall and polished in a way that made Elon's rumpled coding attire seem almost deliberately opposed, Sorkin represented the professional management the venture capitalists insisted upon. The conference room had glass walls and chairs more comfortable than anything they'd started with. Elon sat with his back straight, watching the board members settle in with their leather portfolios and Mont Blanc pens. He was 25 years old. "We need to talk about leadership structure," began the lead investor, his voice carrying the practiced neutrality of someone delivering news he knows won't be well received. Elon's fingers tapped an irregular rhythm on the table. "I've built this company from nothing. The product architecture is mine, the vision is mine, and it's impressive work," the investor replied. "But scaling requires different skills. We need someone with experience managing growth." "I can learn," Elon countered, his South African accent becoming more pronounced as it always did under stress. "The board has decided," another investor interjected. "We're bringing in a CEO with enterprise software experience, someone who's done this before." The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Outside the glass walls, engineers who knew nothing of the conversation continued building Elon's vision, typing his architecture into existence. "And my role?" Elon asked, voice flat. "CTO, you'll run technology. That's your strength." Later that evening, Elon sat alone in his office, the glow of his monitor the only light. Kimball found him there writing code with a mechanical fury. "It's their company now," Elon said without looking up. "I built it, but they own it." Kimball leaned against the doorframe. It's still your product, for now. Elon's fingers paused over the keyboard. I've been outvoted on the product roadmap 3 times this month. They want to focus on newspaper clients exclusively. I've been saying we need to build a consumer-facing product. What will you do? Elon finally looked up, his eyes reflecting the blue light of the screen. Learn, watch, remember. Through 1997 and 1998, Zip2 continued its growth under professional management. Elon remained, nominally as CTO, but increasingly at odds with the direction. He clashed with the new CEO, challenging decisions in board meetings, advocating for his original vision with a tenacity that made the professional managers uncomfortable. They think I'm difficult, Elon told Kimball over a rare dinner away from the office. The restaurant was one of the new upscale establishments catering to the growing wealth in Palo Alto, evidence of the first dot-com boom gathering momentum around them. Maybe I am. You care about the product, Kimball replied. They care about the exit. Elon nodded, pushing his food around his plate. I've been building financial models. If we sell now, with my equity diluted from each round, I'd walk away with maybe 20 million. Most people would consider that a win. A small smile crossed Elon's face. It's not about the money. It's about building something that matters, something that changes how the world works. By early 1999, the technology sector was approaching full frenzy. The Nasdaq climbed weekly. Companies with no revenue commanded 9-figure valuations. Silicon Valley real estate prices soared as 20-something programmers suddenly found themselves millionaires, at least on paper. In a Palo Alto coffee shop, Elon sat across from a senior executive from Compaq Computer Corporation, then one of the largest personal computer manufacturers in the world. The executive wore the confident expression of someone with acquisition power. We're prepared to offer $307 million, the Compaq executive said, sliding a folder across the table. The board is satisfied with the terms. Elon opened the folder, scanning numbers he had already calculated weeks earlier. His stake would be worth approximately $22 million, life-changing money, but a small fraction of the total sale. The result of his founding vision, but also of his dilution through funding rounds and his diminished role. I'll support it, Elon said finally. On February 16, 1999, Compaq announced its acquisition of Zip2 for $307 million. The office celebrated with champagne in plastic cups. Engineers who had joined early enough to receive meaningful equity suddenly found themselves with down payments for Palo Alto homes. Kimball and Elon stood somewhat apart from the celebration, watching. What now? Kimball asked. Elon's eyes had a distant quality, already focusing on something beyond the current moment. Banking. The internet needs a new kind of bank. I've been thinking about it for months. Another startup? You're not going to take time off. Time off for what? The internet is happening now. Banking is still using mainframes and batch processing. Someone needs to rebuild it for the internet age. Within weeks of the acquisition closing, with his share of the proceeds secured, Elon had already leased new office space and begun recruiting a team for X.com. Unlike many in Silicon Valley who diversified their windfall into real estate and safe investments, he placed almost all of his Zip2 proceeds into the new venture. Aren't you worried about risk? Asked an early X.com employee, watching Elon commit millions to the new company. That's everything you made from Zip2. Elon looked up from his computer. The highest return on capital is always to invest in yourself. When you know something is right, you bet accordingly. In his modest apartment, sparsely furnished because he spent so little time there, Elon sometimes stood at the window watching the Palo Alto evening settle over the transformed landscape of his adopted home. The lessons of Zip2 had crystallized into principles. Own enough equity to control your fate. Understand that investors and founders often want different outcomes. Know that vision without power is vulnerability. He kept a framed photograph of the original Zip2 office, the small, fluorescent-lit space above a bookstore where he'd slept under his desk and written the code that became his first fortune, not for nostalgia, but as a reminder. The next time, he silently promised himself he would structure things differently. The next time, he would ensure that being right also meant winning. Outside, the light faded over a Silicon Valley now fully in the grip of the dot-com boom. Elon turned back to his computer and continued architecting the future, this time with the hard-earned knowledge of exactly how much control cost, and exactly how much he was willing to pay for it. The autumn sun cast long shadows across University Avenue in Palo Alto as Elon Musk gazed through the plate glass window of XCOM's headquarters. Outside, dot-com dreamers clutched lattes and discussed IPO valuations in hushed, reverent tones. It was 1999, and the air itself seemed electric with possibility. "We're not just building a bank," Elon said, turning to face the small team gathered around a conference table littered with pizza boxes and empty Red Bull cans. "We're creating money's native layer for the internet." At 38, Elon carried himself with the quiet intensity of a man who had already tasted both success and the bitter sting of corporate politics. His first venture, Zip2, had sold months earlier for $307 million, leaving him with $22 million and something more valuable, a lesson in board dynamics and control. This time would be different. XCOM represented his vision for online banking checking accounts, money market funds, and most crucially, email payments. The internet was transforming everything it touched. Why not finance? "The banks don't understand what's coming," he continued, blue eyes focused somewhere beyond the whiteboard covered in flow diagrams. "By the time they catch up, we'll already own the space." Across town in another Palo Alto office, Peter Thiel and Max Levchin were building Confinity and its promising product called PayPal. The two companies circled each other like wary prize-fighters, each recognizing in the other both threat and opportunity. The winter rains had arrived by the time the merger discussions began in earnest. Steam rose from coffee cups as Elon sat across from Thiel at a quiet corner table in University Cafe. "We're cannibalizing each other," Thiel said, his voice maintaining its characteristic even tone. "The customer acquisition costs are unsustainable when we're both paying people to sign up." Elon nodded, running calculations behind his eyes. "Merged, we control the market. Separated, we might both bleed out before reaching critical mass." Neither man fully trusted the other, but both recognized the cold mathematics of their situation. The Nasdaq had hit 5,000 in March 2000, a dizzying height that made even skeptics believe in perpetual growth. But beneath the exuberance, cracks were forming. Valuations couldn't defy gravity forever. "You keep X.com's banking infrastructure. We bring PayPal's payment system and user base," Thiel said. "And leadership?" Elon asked, though he already knew his preferred answer. "We'll need to discuss details," Thiel replied carefully. The merger was announced with appropriate Silicon Valley fanfare, a forced marriage to prevent mutual destruction. Elon would serve as CEO of the combined company, which would eventually adopt the PayPal name. Summer nights in the Bay Area carried a pleasant chill, but inside PayPal's offices, the atmosphere was anything but cool. The engineering team had divided into factions over what appeared on the surface to be a simple technical dispute. "Windows gives us speed to market," Elon insisted during a late-night strategy session. "Most people already know how to use it. We don't have time for the learning curve." The senior engineers exchanged glances. "Windows isn't stable enough for financial transactions at our scale," argued one. "Unix gives us the security infrastructure we need." What began as a technical disagreement soon metastasized into something more fundamental, a question of trust and vision. Engineers who had followed Thiel and Levchin saw Musk's insistence on Windows as evidence that he didn't understand the technical foundation needed. Elon paced the room frustrated. He could see the engineering team slipping away from him, their loyalty remaining with the Confinity founders. The technical arguments had merit, but Elon sensed this was no longer about technology, it was about allegiance. "I've built and sold a technology company before," he reminded them, an edge creeping into his voice. "Time to market matters more than architectural purity." The room fell silent, but the dissent remained palpable. Later, Walking to his car in the empty parking lot, Elon realized that being right wasn't enough in leadership. You needed people to follow you, believe in you. The technical dispute was becoming a proxy war for control of the company's soul. "Congratulations," Peter Thiel said, raising a glass of champagne at the small dinner gathering. "When's the honeymoon?" 2 weeks in Sydney, Elon replied, his arm around his new wife, Justine. The September evening had a golden quality, the kind that seems to presage change. "I've set up remote access to stay connected." "Don't," Justine interjected with a smile. "It's supposed to be our honeymoon." Thiel nodded politely, but shared a knowing look with Max Levchin. Silicon Valley rarely rewarded absence, even for life's milestones. When Elon and Justine departed for Australia, in early October 2000, the Nasdaq had already fallen nearly 40% from its March peak. The dot-com bubble wasn't just leaking, it was actively deflating. Companies that had been valued in billions based on eyeballs and stickiness were watching their stock prices collapse as investors suddenly remembered to ask about revenue models. The board meeting was called while Elon was still in Sydney. The decision, when it came, was delivered via phone call. Peter Thiel would replace him as CEO, effective immediately. "This is a coup," Elon said into the hotel phone, pacing the room in pre-dawn darkness while Justine watched with concern from the bed. His voice remained controlled, but anger simmered beneath the surface. "I'm the largest shareholder. I founded X.com. We agreed on the leadership structure during the merger." The response was couched in the language of fiduciary responsibility and technical expertise. The Windows versus Unix debate had become a referendum on his leadership, and he had lost. Silicon Valley's playbook was clear: move fast, cite performance concerns, preserve equity, but strip operational control. When he hung up, the hotel room seemed suddenly smaller, more confined. Outside, Sydney Harbour glittered under a sky just beginning to lighten. "What happens now?" Justine asked quietly. "I remain the largest shareholder," Elon replied, his mind already calculating implications and scenarios. "About 11.7%, they can't remove me from the board. But the sting of the ouster would remain. Being right about the vision wasn't enough if you couldn't maintain command of the ship." The PayPal offices had a different energy when Elon returned. Sympathetic glances followed him through the hallways, but business continued. The dot-com crash accelerated around them. Empty offices appearing on University Avenue as startups folded. BMWs quietly returned to dealerships. Cafes less crowded as severance packages ran out. Yet amid the carnage, PayPal was finding its footing. The transaction volume grew steadily, particularly on a nascent auction site called eBay. Peter Thiel had made his own calculation. The Unix infrastructure would indeed be more stable for the long term, but Elon's focus on customer growth and market dominance had positioned them well. Elon maintained his board seat and worked to influence strategy where he could, but the daily operations were now beyond his control. The lesson crystallized in his mind: governance ultimately trumps genius. In future ventures, he would ensure control mechanisms protected his position regardless of board composition. "We're seeing interest from several potential acquirers," Thiel informed the board in early 2002. "eBay makes the most strategic sense given our user overlap." Elon leaned forward. "What valuation range are we discussing?" "They're indicating around $1.5 billion. A slight smile crossed Elon's face. Even after the dot-com crash, with the Nasdaq down over 60% from its peak, PayPal had managed to create substantial value. His 11.7% stake would yield approximately $180 million, a war chest that could fund his next moves. The eBay acquisition closed in October 2002. Elon walked out of PayPal's offices for the last time on a clear autumn afternoon, the $180 million representing not just capital but possibility. Where most successful founders might diversify, buy real estate, or establish conservative investment portfolios, Elon was already thinking differently. At a quiet dinner in Menlo Park with a small circle that would later be known as the PayPal Mafia, conversations drifted toward what came next. Peter Thiel was considering a hedge fund. Others talked about new startups or venture capital. Space, Elon said simply when his turn came, causing a moment of silence around the table. Commercial access to space costs too much. The physics allows for a 100-fold reduction in launch costs, but the industry has had no incentive to innovate. And sustainable energy, he continued. The transition from hydrocarbons is inevitable, but needs acceleration. A few exchanged skeptical glances. These weren't typical Silicon Valley plays. They required massive capital, involved heavily regulated industries, and operated on decades-long timescales. "You're talking about using your PayPal proceeds to start a rocket company?" asked one of the former executives incredulously. "Among other things," Elon replied with the quiet confidence of someone who had already run the calculations. "The capital from PayPal isn't an ending. It's the beginning of addressing the problems that actually matter for the long-term future." Later that night, driving home along the 280 freeway, with the Santa Cruz Mountains silhouetted against the western sky, Elon reflected on the 3 years since founding X.com. The ouster had been painful but clarifying. Money, he had realized, was not merely a score. It was potential energy to be converted into civilization-scale impact. The PayPal experience had also crystallized his network. These were people who could help build what came next. Operators, investors who understood how to scale technology businesses. The so-called PayPal Mafia would become a gravitational center in Silicon Valley's next chapter. More importantly, he now had the resources to pursue the ambitions that had occupied his mind since childhood: space exploration, sustainable energy, and artificial intelligence. The ideas that had once seemed like science fiction could now become engineering challenges with sufficient capital and focus. As he pulled into his driveway, Elon already knew how he would deploy the PayPal windfall. Where others might see $180 million as wealth to be protected, he saw it as ammunition for the battles that mattered. The dot-com crash had wiped out paper fortunes built on hype, but his vision extended beyond market cycles to transformation measured in decades. The house was quiet as he entered. On his desk lay preliminary research on rocket propulsion systems and notes about electric vehicle battery technology. The PayPal chapter was closing, but the architecture for what would follow was already taking shape in his mind. An interlocking set of companies addressing humanity's fundamental challenges. The lessons of the X.com to PayPal journey had been expensive but valuable. Control mechanics mattered more than board titles. Technical disputes could become existential governance battles, and being right was insufficient if you couldn't bring people along with you. These insights would shape his approach to every venture that followed. Outside, the Silicon Valley night was cool and clear, the stars visible despite the suburban light pollution. Somewhere among them, Mars glowed reddish in the darkness, a destination that now, perhaps, lay within reach. The last amber rays of a California sunset filtered through the blinds of the nondescript industrial building in Hawthorne, casting long shadows across epoxy floors that still smelled faintly of their previous tenant. Outside, the drone of aircraft from nearby LAX provided a constant reminder of flight, both the conventional kind that most people accepted as the pinnacle of human transportation, and the unconventional kind that consumed the thoughts of the lean, intense man standing alone in the cavernous space. Elon Musk stood perfectly still, hands clasped behind his back, surveying what most would see as emptiness, but what he envisioned as possibility. The year was 2002, and the $100 million that now resided in his bank accounts represented not wealth to be protected, but fuel for ambitions that most considered impossible. "This will do," he said quietly to the real estate agent who maintained a respectful distance. "We'll take it." The agent smiled uncertainly. "For a software company, Mr. Musk?" "No," Elon replied, his South African accent still faintly detectable beneath years of North American inflection. "For rockets." The agent's smile faltered, but Elon had already moved on mentally, calculating square footage and ceiling heights, envisioning machine tools and fabrication stations. The money from PayPal's acquisition by eBay was still fresh. The sale had closed just weeks earlier, but Elon had already decided its purpose. While most newly minted centimillionaires were shopping for mansions in Bel Air or yachts in Marina del Rey, Elon was leasing industrial space in a working-class neighborhood south of the airport. Later that evening, in a modest rental home that belied his financial status, Elon sat at a kitchen table covered with books on rocketry and aerospace engineering. The spines were cracked, the pages dog-eared and annotated in a precise hand. He wasn't merely reading, he was teaching himself the fundamentals of rocket science from first principles. The phone rang, breaking his concentration. He answered without looking away from the equation he was working through. "Elon, it's Michael. Did you sign those leases today?" Michael Griffin, an aerospace veteran with a PhD from the University of Maryland and experience at NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory, had been consulting with Elon on the nascent venture. "Just left there," Elon confirmed. 40,000 square feet, high bay space. We can start moving equipment in next week." "This is really happening then," Michael said, his tone mixing professional curiosity with personal incredulity. "You're really going to try to build rockets from scratch?" "Not try," Elon corrected. "Do." There was a pause on the line. "You know, the Russians are willing to sell you rockets. I made those introductions. That's still the sensible path forward." Elon's pencil stopped moving. "I met with them again yesterday. Their price is still absurd. 10 million per launch for technology that should cost a quarter of that." He tapped the pencil against the table, a quiet rhythm that matched the intensity of his thoughts. "The problem isn't that rockets exist. The problem is that the wrong people are building them, with the wrong incentives, using the wrong methods." "And do you think you can do better?" Griffin asked, not unkindly. "I know we can," Elon said. "Vertical integration, rapid iteration, first principles thinking. The aerospace industry is trapped in amber, Michael. They build rockets the same way they did in the 1960s because it worked then. They're optimizing for risk aversion rather than cost, and the incentive structures reward that approach." Griffin sighed. "Well, I've given you my recommendation. If you're determined to build rather than buy, you'll need operational expertise. Someone who knows the industry from the inside, who can translate between your vision and aerospace reality." "I'm already on it," Elon said. "I've been talking to someone from Aerospace Corporation, Gwyn Shotwell. She understands the vision." "Gwyn's good," Griffin acknowledged. "Very good. But this will be harder than you think, Elon. Much harder." "It's supposed to be hard," Elon replied. "That's why no one's disrupted the industry in 40 years." After hanging up, Elon returned to his calculations, working through the night as was increasingly his habit. Outside, the sprawl of Los Angeles twinkled beneath a blanket of smog, millions of lives proceeding in ordinary fashion while one man plotted an extraordinary trajectory. "Are you absolutely certain about this?" asked the attorney, sliding the final incorporation papers across the desk. "This represents nearly 2/3 of your liquid assets." The conference room at Space Exploration Technologies, already abbreviated to SpaceX in Elon's emails and conversations, was sparse, containing only a table, chairs, and a whiteboard covered with equations and sketches of rocket stages. "I'm certain," Elon said, signing without hesitation. 100 million. That should give us runway for 3 attempts. "3 attempts at what, exactly?" the attorney asked. 3 rockets, Elon clarified. "If we can't reach orbit in 3 attempts, we probably don't deserve to be in this business." The attorney raised an eyebrow but said nothing more as he collected the paperwork. When he left, Elon remained seated, staring at the whiteboard. The company had only existed for a few months, yet already it was consuming nearly all his waking hours. He'd rented a small house in Bel Air, nothing ostentatious, but spent so little time there it hardly mattered where he lived. Most nights found him on a cot in the corner of his office at SpaceX, rising at dawn to continue work. A soft knock at the conference room door interrupted his thoughts. Gwyn Shotwell stood in the doorway, a stack of files in her arms. In her early 40s, with the polished professionalism of someone who had navigated the male-dominated aerospace world for decades, she projected a calm confidence that Elon had immediately recognized as essential to his fledgling company. "The Merlin engine specifications," she said, placing the files on the table. and the preliminary supplier contracts you wanted to review. Elon nodded. Thank you. Have you had a chance to look through them? I have, she said, taking a seat across from him. And I think we need to reconsider our approach. These suppliers are quoting prices based on traditional aerospace margins. If we're truly committed to reducing launch costs by a factor of 10, we can't rely on the existing supply chain. A thin smile crossed Elon's face. Exactly, that's why we won't. He stood and walked to the whiteboard, erasing a section with his sleeve and quickly sketching a vertical flowchart. Engines, avionics, structures, software, we build it all in-house. Vertical integration from raw materials to launch. Gwyn studied the diagram. After 15 years at Aerospace Corporation, she knew intimately how the industry operated and how radical Elon's approach would be. That's not how this industry works, she said carefully. That's the point, Elon replied. The aerospace industry is an interlocking ecosystem of contractors and subcontractors, each adding their margin, each optimizing for their piece rather than the whole. No one has both the capital and the incentive to rebuild the entire stack from scratch. Until now, Gwyn concluded. Until now, Elon agreed. We'll start with the Merlin engine, then fabrication, then avionics. Gwyn nodded slowly. It's ambitious, but there's a reason companies specialize. The learning curves are steep, the expertise is highly domain-specific. We'll hire the expertise, Elon interrupted. And where we can't find it, we'll develop it. The fundamental physics of rocketry isn't magic, it's engineering. Complex engineering, but engineering nonetheless. As they discussed implementation details, Elon's phone buzzed with a text message. He glanced down, then back at Gwyn. I need to take this. It's about another project I'm considering. After Gwyn left, Elon called the number from the text message. Martin, hello. Yes, I received the business plan. Electric sports cars are certainly interesting, but I have some questions about the battery technology. The call lasted an hour, with Elon pacing the conference room, asking increasingly technical questions about lithium-ion battery packs, motor efficiency, and manufacturing approaches. When he finally hung up, night had fallen over Los Angeles, the SpaceX facility quieting as most employees headed home. Elon, however, remained, pulling up the Tesla Motors business plan on his laptop. The company, founded by Martin Eberhard and Mark Tarpenning, was attempting something as audacious in the automotive world as SpaceX was in aerospace. Building a high-performance electric vehicle when most people associated electric cars with glorified golf carts. Vertical integration, Elon murmured to himself, scrolling through the document. Battery technology, software, drivetrain. He made notes in the margins, already seeing connections between the problems of space launch and electric vehicles. Both industries dominated by legacy thinking, both ripe for first principles redesign. The summer of 2003 found Elon increasingly dividing his attention between SpaceX growing operations in Hawthorne and the fledgling Tesla Motors in San Carlos. SpaceX now employed several dozen engineers, many poached from established aerospace companies with the lure of equity and the promise of building something revolutionary. The February loss of the Space Shuttle Columbia and its crew had cast a pall over the American space program, reinforcing Elon's belief that new approaches were necessary. NASA had grown risk-averse and bureaucratic. Innovation had stagnated. In the SpaceX machine shop, the first Merlin engine was taking shape, component by component. Elon often stood watching the fabrication process, occasionally stepping in to suggest modifications or question design choices. His hands-on approach unsettled some of the veteran aerospace engineers, accustomed to layers of management and approval processes. That injector plate design won't provide the chamber pressure we need, he told one engineer, pointing to a blueprint. We need to redesign it. The engineer, with 20 years at Boeing, looked skeptical. That's not how we did it at. I know, Elon interrupted. That's precisely why we're doing it differently. First principles, remember? What are the physics telling us, not what are the precedents? Such exchanges were common, and while they sometimes created friction, They also established a culture of questioning assumptions and rapid iteration that became SpaceX DNA. Failure was acceptable. Failure to learn from failure was not. Meanwhile, Elon's conversations with Tesla's founders had progressed from interest to investment. By late 2003, he was preparing to lead their Series A funding round, committing $6.5 million of his dwindling liquid assets to a company that had yet to build a single car. "You're spreading yourself thin," warned one of his financial advisors during a rare meeting in Elon's sparse Bel Air rental. The conventional wisdom would be to diversify, not to concentrate nearly all your net worth in two pre-revenue startups in entirely different industries. Elon, looking out over the Los Angeles basin, hands clasped behind his back, merely nodded. Conventional wisdom would also say it's impossible for a private company to build orbital rockets, or for a startup to successfully launch a new American car company, especially an electric one. "That's precisely my point," the advisor insisted. "Either of these ventures would be considered high risk in isolation. Together, they represent an extraordinary concentration of risk." Elon turned from the window, his expression calm but resolute. "The greater risk would be to do nothing. If we don't accelerate sustainable energy, climate change will continue unabated. If we don't make life multiplanetary, a single catastrophic event could end human consciousness as we know it." The advisor sighed, recognizing the futility of conventional financial advice in the face of such unconventional thinking. "At least consider bringing in additional investors to share the burden." "I am," Elon said. "But in the early stages, someone needs to bet the farm. These companies need runway to prove their concepts before traditional investors will take them seriously." By early 2004, the dual tracks of Elon's vision were becoming more concrete. SpaceX had completed its first Merlin engine test firing, a modest success, though far from the performance parameters needed for orbital flight. The Falcon 1 rocket was taking shape on the factory floor, its relatively small size belying its significance as the first privately developed liquid-fueled rocket designed for orbit. Simultaneously, Elon had completed the Tesla investment, becoming chairman of the board and the company's largest shareholder. The Tesla team was working on converting the Lotus Elisa chassis to electric power, creating what would eventually become the Roadster. On a rare weekend when he wasn't at either company, Elon sat in the living room of his rental home with his younger brother Kimball, who had relocated to California after his own success as an entrepreneur. "You don't do anything small, do you?" Kimball asked, nursing a beer as they watched the sunset. Elon gave a half smile. "What would be the point? Most people will be taking it easy after PayPal," Kimball observed. "You're working harder than ever, with more at stake." "The PayPal exit wasn't the end of something," Elon replied. "It was the beginning. For the first time, I have the capital to address problems that actually matter." Kimball studied his brother's face, noting the intensity that had always been there, but seemed to have deepened. "Space and electric cars. They seem so different." "They're not," Elon said, setting down his glass of whiskey. "They're both engineering problems masquerading as impossible problems. Both trapped in business models and thinking that haven't fundamentally changed in decades. Both capable of being reinvented through first principles and vertical integration." He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the sprawl of Los Angeles, at the cars crawling along distant freeways, burning gasoline refined from oil that had formed millions of years ago, at the haze of pollution that hung perpetually over the basin. "The trick isn't just building better rockets or better cars," he continued. "It's building better systems for building rockets and cars. That's the real innovation." Kimball watched his brother, recognizing the pattern that had defined Elon since childhood, the ability to see systems rather than objects, patterns rather than instances, futures rather than presents. "And you think you can succeed where others have failed?" Kimball asked, though it wasn't really a question. "I think we have to try," Elon answered simply. "And if we fail, at least we'll fail while daring greatly." As night fell over Los Angeles, the lights of the city mirrored the stars above, distant, numerous, separate. But in the mind of the man who had bet everything on space and sustainable energy, they were all connected, part of a single system that extended from Earth to the cosmos, from the present to a future that few could imagine, but that one man was determined to build. The last traces of twilight faded over the San Francisco Bay as Elon Musk stood alone on the balcony of his rented Menlo Park apartment. The distant lights of the city sparkled like the circuits he'd spent his life obsessing over. He sipped from a lukewarm cup of coffee, his third since dinner, watching the fog roll in beneath the gathering darkness. The year was 2006, and all around him, America hummed with the false confidence of a housing bubble at its zenith. But mansions sprouted across the landscape like concrete toadstools. Television commercials promised easy mortgages, easy wealth. In the valley, the wounds of the dot-com collapse had healed, and a new optimism blossomed. Different this time, they all said. Always different. Elon knew better. He'd survived one tech crash already. His cousins, Lyndon and Peter Reeve, sat in the living room behind him, hunched over laptops, still working despite the late hour. The three had been strategizing for months, and tonight they were putting finishing touches on the presentation for their new venture, Solar City. "You realize," Lyndon said when Elon finally returned inside, "that we're asking people to put small power plants on their roofs." "That's exactly what we're doing," Elon replied, his South African accent subtle but present. "And we're going to let them do it without any upfront cost. Monthly payments lower than their current utility bills." Peter looked up from his computer. "The feed-in tariffs in California make the math work, but it's still going to require significant capital." Elon's face betrayed nothing as he committed mentally to the initial $10 million investment. The money represented a significant portion of what remained from his PayPal exit. The rest was already flowing like water into his other ventures. Tesla and SpaceX, neither of which had yet to prove themselves commercially viable. "I'll cover the initial funding," he said simply. The cousins exchanged glances. They understood the gravity of what wasn't being said. Elon was placing bets across the board: electric cars, rockets, and now solar. Three industries with notoriously high barriers to entry. Three industries where failure was the historical norm. By the autumn of 2007, the first hairline fractures appeared in the financial system. Bear Stearns hedge funds collapsed. Foreclosure signs began dotting suburban neighborhoods. But in San Carlos, California, inside a nondescript industrial building, Elon faced a more immediate crisis. The Tesla Roadster was behind schedule, over budget, and bleeding money. The transmission design had failed. The company cycled through CEOs like disposable batteries. When Elon arrived that morning, the factory floor buzzed with tense energy. "We're looking at another 6-month delay," the production manager informed him, gesturing toward the partially assembled Roadster prototype, "and the cost per unit keeps climbing." Elon moved closer to the vehicle. Sleek, low-slung, a symbol of everything he believed possible. He ran his hand along its carbon fiber body. "Unacceptable," he said quietly. "We need to rethink the entire transmission approach." That evening, he called a board meeting. The conference room was sparse. Folding chairs, a whiteboard, the smell of takeout food. Outside, the first autumn rains pelted the windows. Inside, Tesla's future hung in the balance. "We need another funding round," the CFO explained, and quickly. Martin Eberhard, Tesla's co-founder and recently ousted CEO, sat in stony silence. The tension between the men was palpable, the result of disagreements about production timelines and company direction. Elon leaned forward, fingers steepled. "I'll increase my investment, but there needs to be a management change." By the end of the night, the path was clear. Elon would assume a more direct, operational role. By early 2008, he would take the title of CEO, becoming the company's fourth in short succession. Later, alone in the darkened factory, he sat in one of the Roadster prototypes, hands on the steering wheel, staring through the windshield at nothing in particular. The company was burning through cash at a frightening rate. His personal fortune, once substantial, was draining away, and yet he couldn't walk away. 6,000 miles away, on a remote Pacific atoll called Omelek Island in the Kwajalein Atoll, another crisis was unfolding. The SpaceX team huddled in makeshift control rooms, surrounded by equipment shipped in at enormous expense. The tropical heat was oppressive, the humidity crawling over skin like invisible insects. On August 3, 2008, the Falcon 1 rocket stood on its launch pad, gleaming in the harsh equatorial sun. It was the third attempt. The first two had failed spectacularly, the first lasting just 33 seconds before a fuel leak caused a fire, the second reaching space but failing during stage separation. Elon stood among his engineers, his face drawn and pale. Few knew the extent of his financial commitment to this moment. He had invested nearly $100 million of his personal fortune into SpaceX, money that could have purchased islands, jets, decades of luxury. Instead, it had bought him this moment of excruciating tension on a remote tropical island. "Flight computers go," came the call from the launch controller. The engines ignited, and the slender white rocket rose from the pad, punching through low clouds, climbing toward the stratosphere. For 2 minutes and 30 seconds, everything proceeded perfectly. Then, during stage separation, something went wrong. The first stage recontacted the second stage. Fuel began to spin uncontrollably. "Vehicle loss," someone said quietly. The control room fell silent. 3 failures in a row. No commercial space company had survived such a streak. That night, in a sparse room with a ceiling fan that barely stirred the humid air, Elon made one of the hardest decisions of his life. There was enough money for one more attempt, one final shot. "We'll try again," he told his team the next morning, and putting everything into the fourth launch. Back in California, Tesla's situation grew increasingly desperate as 2008 progressed. The global financial system was now in full collapse. In September, Lehman Brothers filed for bankruptcy. Credit markets froze solid. The stock market plummeted. In Tesla's San Carlos facility, Elon paced through the engineering department. The company was now burning through approximately $4 million monthly. His personal financial resources were stretched to the breaking point between Tesla and SpaceX. J.B. Straubel, Tesla's chief technical officer, approached with the latest battery test results. "We've improved the cooling system," J.B. said, spreading diagrams across a workbench. "But manufacturing costs are still way too high." Elon rubbed his temples. "We need to vertically integrate more of the process. Long term, we build the batteries ourselves." "Long term assumes there is a long term," J.B. replied carefully. The words hung between them. Both men knew Tesla had weeks, not months, of runway left. That evening, Elon called his investors from his office. Outside, the early darkness of autumn had fallen. The financial world was collapsing, and he was asking for more money for an electric car company that had delivered barely a handful of vehicles. "I'm putting in my last available capital," he told them. "Everything I have left." On September 28, 2008, the Falcon 1 stood again on the launch pad at Omelek Island. This time, Elon watched from SpaceX headquarters in Hawthorne, California, surrounded by engineers hunched over laptops displaying telemetry data. The room was so quiet he could hear the soft whir of cooling fans in the computers. T-10, 9, 8. He thought of his childhood in South Africa, reading science fiction, dreaming of space. He thought of his first company, Zip2, and the night he'd slept under his desk because he couldn't afford an apartment. He thought of PayPal and the coup that had ousted him as CEO during his honeymoon. He thought of Tesla, currently days from bankruptcy. 3, 2, 1, ignition. The rocket rose again, a pencil-thin white line against the blue Pacific sky. First stage separation occurred. The second stage ignited. Minutes passed. The room remained silent, collectively holding its breath. Second stage cutoff, someone finally called. Nominal orbit achieved. For a moment, no one moved. Then the room erupted. Engineers embraced, shouted, some wept openly. Falcon 1 had become the first privately developed liquid fuel rocket to reach orbit. Elon sat motionless in his chair, eyes closed, the weight of what might have been his fourth consecutive failure lifting from his shoulders. The victory brought more than emotional relief. Days later, NASA called. The space agency offered SpaceX a $1.6 billion commercial orbital transportation services contract to resupply the International Space Station. The company's financial lifeline was secured. December 2008 arrived cold and uncertain. The global financial crisis had deepened. Unemployment soared. Auto dealerships across America stood empty, their lots full of unsold vehicles. General Motors and Chrysler begged Congress for bailouts. At Tesla, the situation had reached its nadir. The company needed another round of financing to survive, but in frozen credit markets, finding investors was nearly impossible. Elon had committed his last personal funds, selling assets and borrowing against others. He was now living on friends' couches. His marriage to Justine had dissolved, and his financial resources were exhausted. On December 23, the phone call from NASA about the SpaceX contract had provided a moment of relief, but Tesla still stood at the precipice. Christmas Eve arrived. Gray clouds hung low over Silicon Valley, threatening rain that never quite materialized. In a conference room at a law firm in Palo Alto, Elon sat with Tesla's legal team and a group of investors. The paperwork for a last-minute financing round lay spread across the polished table. Hours passed. Legal details were negotiated, terms adjusted. Outside, darkness fell. Through the windows, Christmas lights twinkled in nearby office buildings. At 6:18 p.m. on Christmas Eve, the final signatures were applied. Tesla had secured the financing it needed, barely enough to keep the company operational. The deal included the last of Elon's liquid assets. Walking to his car afterward, Elon paused in the empty parking lot. The cool night air filled his lungs. For the first time in months, he could take a full breath without the crushing pressure of imminent failure. He had bet everything, his fortune, his reputation, his future, on the belief that electric cars, commercial spaceflight, and solar energy weren't just possible, but necessary. In 2008 alone, Tesla had generated about $15 million in revenue against an $82 million loss. SpaceX had failed 3 times before succeeding. His personal life was in shambles, his financial resources depleted. And yet, somehow, both companies had survived the year, just barely, by days, not weeks. Later that night, in the borrowed guest room of a friend's house, Elon stared at the ceiling, unable to sleep despite his exhaustion. "I thought we would fail," he whispered to the darkness, "but I couldn't live with not trying." Outside, a light rain began to fall, washing away the last hours of a year that had brought him to the edge of ruin and back. Ahead lay challenges he could scarcely imagine: production scaling, new vehicle models, larger rockets, public offerings. But in that moment, on Christmas Eve 2008, it was enough simply to have survived. The rain continued, gentle and cleansing, as Silicon Valley slept, and Elon Musk, against all odds, prepared to fight another day. The rain traced thin rivulets down the expansive windows of Tesla's Palo Alto headquarters, casting rippling shadows across Elon Musk's face as he stared at the spreadsheet illuminated by his laptop. Outside, the world was mired in the worst recession since the Great Depression. Unemployment hovered near 10%. The auto industry lay in ruins. General Motors and Chrysler sheltered in Chapter 11 bankruptcy, protected by government bailouts that had left a bitter taste in the public's mouth. Yet here he was, preparing to take an electric car company public. "You realize the last American car company IPO was Ford in 1956, said the silver-haired investment banker sitting across from him. "That's over half a century ago." Elon nodded, his eyes never leaving the screen. History is just a series of impossibilities that someone decided to overcome. It was early 2010. The Nasdaq was tentatively recovering from its crash, but investors remained skittish. Clean technology companies like Solyndra had flamed out spectacularly. The graveyard of failed electric vehicle startups grew more crowded each quarter. And Tesla, his Tesla was burning cash at a prodigious rate. The banker closed his leather portfolio. "We'll target $17 per share, if the roadshow goes well." When the man left, Elon remained motionless by the window, watching raindrops race each other down the glass. Tesla had absorbed nearly all the capital he'd extracted from PayPal. SpaceX consumed the rest. He had borrowed money to pay rent. The previous Christmas, he had written in an email to a friend that the company was 4 weeks from bankruptcy. No one knew that, of course. No one could know. His phone vibrated. J.B. Straubel, Tesla's chief technical officer, a brilliant engineer who had been with him since the beginning. "The Toyota people just landed," J.B. said quietly. "They're on their way to the office." "I'll be there in 10 minutes, Elon replied, closing his laptop. The potential partnership with Toyota represented more than capital, though the rumored $50 million investment would certainly help. It represented legitimacy. The world's most efficient automaker joining forces with a Silicon Valley startup that had delivered fewer than 1,500 roadsters. Slipping into his Tesla-branded jacket, he made his way to the parking lot. The roadster gleamed wet in the California rain, its curves both familiar and alien in an automotive landscape dominated by gasoline engines and stamped steel. He slid behind the wheel, feeling the reassuring weight of the battery pack beneath him. The car accelerated silently into the gray afternoon. The cavernous new United Motor Manufacturing Incorporated factory in Fremont stretched before him, empty and echoing. 5 million square feet of automotive history, recently abandoned by Toyota and General Motors as their joint venture collapsed under recession pressures. Elon's footsteps echoed through the silent production lines as he walked alongside the small delegation of Tesla engineers and executives. "We're getting it for a song," he said, his voice bouncing off distant walls. "About $42 million. In 2009 dollars, that's practically free." "It's enormous," said Gilbert Passon, the manufacturing executive Tesla had poached from Toyota. His French accent carried through the empty space. "We will use perhaps 20% of it initially." Elon stopped, turning a full circle to take in the dormant machinery, the shadowed rafters high above. "We'll fill it," he said with quiet certainty. "The Model S is just the beginning." In his mind, he could already see it, robots articulating with precision, aluminum bodies gliding along assembly lines, batteries slotting into place like the pieces of a puzzle he'd been assembling his entire life. The factory represented a necessary risk. Tesla couldn't remain a boutique manufacturer of expensive toys for Silicon Valley executives. Volume was the only path to survival. Later that evening, in a small conference room overlooking the factory floor, he reviewed the designs for the Model S with Franz von Holzhausen, Tesla's chief designer. "The 17-inch touchscreen is non-negotiable," Elon said, tapping the schematic. Franz nodded. "It's revolutionary, but expensive. The entire center stack gone. Every function controlled through software we can update remotely." Elon's finger traced the clean lines of the sedan's profile and the aluminum body. "Also expensive," Franz noted. "Also necessary," Elon countered. "Lighter means more range. More range means fewer compromises. Fewer compromises means wider adoption." He spoke with the patient certainty of a man explaining simple arithmetic. The mistake Detroit always made was asking what customers would accept rather than what would actually advance the technology. Through the window, the empty factory waited like a canvas. May 25, 2012, arrived cloudless and cool at Cape Canaveral. Elon stood with the SpaceX team, watching the monitors as the Dragon spacecraft, his spacecraft, approached the International Space Station. The capsule had been launched 3 days earlier atop a Falcon 9 rocket, and now floated in orbital choreography with the station, prepared to become the first commercially built spacecraft to dock with the ISS. 5 meters, called Gwynne Shotwell, SpaceX president. Her normally businesslike demeanor showed cracks of emotion. Capture sequence initiating. On the screen, the station's robotic arm extended, graceful as a ballerina, to grasp the Dragon. The room held its breath. "Capture confirmed," someone shouted. The control room erupted. Engineers embraced. Someone popped champagne, spraying it across computer monitors. Elon stood motionless in the center of the celebration, his face a complex map of emotions: exhaustion, relief, something approaching joy, but tempered by the knowledge of all that remained undone. Later, he stepped outside alone, tilting his face to the Florida sun. 14 years earlier, he had known nothing about rockets. He had bought textbooks, taught himself orbital mechanics, recruited aerospace engineers who believed in the impossible. 3 failed Falcon 1 launches had nearly broken the company. The 4th succeeded only because there was no money left for a 5th attempt. Now Dragon floated in orbit, docked to the ISS, carrying supplies where once only nation-states had traveled. His phone buzzed with congratulatory messages and press requests. He ignored them, watching a cloud shaped like a dragon drift across the blue expanse above. 3 weeks later, on June 22, 2012, Tesla's Fremont factory hummed with activity. What had been a hollow shell 2 years earlier now pulsed with purpose. Hundreds of invited guests, investors, and media filled a designated area of the production floor. A stage had been erected before a backdrop of robotic assembly arms. Backstage, Elon straightened his jacket, rehearsing key points in his mind. The Model S represented more than a new product. It was Tesla's bid for relevance beyond the niche luxury sports car market. Everything rode on its success. "Ready?" J.B. Straubel appeared at his elbow. Elon nodded, his face settling into its public mask. He walked onto the stage to applause, waited for it to subside, then spoke in measured tones about the journey, about the recession that had nearly killed the company, about the Department of Energy loan that had provided crucial capital when private markets froze, about the partnerships with Panasonic for batteries and Toyota for manufacturing expertise. Then came the moment. He gestured toward the darkened section of the factory floor. "Ladies and gentlemen, the Model S." Lights illuminated a silver sedan as it glided silently onto the stage. The crowd rose to its feet. Camera flashes erupted like lightning. The Model S rotated slowly on its platform, a vision from a future that suddenly felt attainable, sleek, purposeful, with its signature 17-inch touchscreen glowing in the center console. Later, as guests took turns sitting in the car, running their hands over its aluminum body, marveling at the software interface, Elon stood apart with Franz von Holzhausen. "It's a computer on wheels," the tech journalist was saying nearby. "The first car designed for the iPhone generation." "It's more than that," Elon said quietly to Franz. "It's the beginning of the transition." His eyes tracked across the factory to where the first supercharger station prototype stood, its clean lines and minimalist design a statement of purpose. The cars, the charging network, the solar company, the batteries, it's all one system. Franz nodded. "Most people still don't see it." "They will," Elon replied. The fall of 2012 brought validation from unexpected quarters. Motor Trend named the Model S its 2013 Car of the Year, the first time an electric vehicle had won the award. Automobile magazine followed suit. The Wall Street Journal, long skeptical, published a grudgingly positive review. Tesla's stock price, which had languished below its IPO value for months, began a steady climb. In the quiet of his office, Elon reviewed the expansion plans for the supercharger network, proprietary charging stations that would eventually line American highways like pearls on a string. Free to Tesla owners, the network represented both a public good and a competitive moat. No other manufacturer could offer free coast-to-coast refueling. A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. It was JB, holding a copy of The Economist. "They're calling you the real-life Tony Stark," JB said with a half-smile, tossing the magazine onto Elon's desk. The cover showed Iron Man alongside images of the Model S and Dragon spacecraft. Elon glanced at it without picking it up. Stark inherited his father's company. We built ours from nothing. Still, it's good press. The public needs narratives they understand. Elon nodded absently, returning to the supercharger map. The public's perception of him had shifted from eccentric entrepreneur to visionary industrialist. The comparison to the fictional genius superhero provided a framework for understanding his seemingly disparate ventures. "The TED people called again," JB continued. "They want you for the 2013 conference, main stage." Elon considered this. TED represented a particular kind of legitimacy, a platform for ideas deemed worthy of global dissemination. It would provide an opportunity to frame the narrative not just around Tesla or SpaceX, but around the larger vision that united them. "I'll do it," he said finally, "but I want to talk about Mars." JB raised an eyebrow. "Not just Tesla. Tesla is a means, not an end." Elon's finger traced a route on the supercharger map from Los Angeles to New York. "Sustainable energy on Earth buys us time. Mars gives us a backup drive for consciousness." Outside his window, the California sunset painted the sky in shades of red that reminded him of Martian soil. The recession was receding. Tesla had survived its near-death experience. SpaceX had proven commercial spaceflight viable. The foundations were laid. He thought back to that rainy day in 2010, preparing for an IPO most experts predicted would fail. $226 million raised, enough to keep the dream alive during the darkest days of production. Now, at the close of 2012, both companies stood on firmer ground. Not safe, never that, but viable, legitimate. The impossible rendered merely difficult. He turned from the window to face the accumulated work on his desk. Engineering problems, production schedules, financial projections. The real work happened here, not in magazine covers or television interviews. In the grinding, daily effort to bend reality toward a future most couldn't yet imagine. Outside, the first stars appeared in the deepening blue, Mars among them, a red dot carrying the weight of his most distant ambitions. Patient, waiting. The desert wind carried dust across the construction site, tiny particles glinting in the afternoon sun like scattered diamonds. Elon Musk stood at the edge of what would soon become the world's largest battery factory, his tie fluttering against his white shirt as he gazed across the Nevada landscape. The gigafactory was still largely a skeleton of steel beams and concrete foundations, but in his mind's eye, he could already see the completed structure, a gleaming monument to vertical integration, a cathedral of manufacturing. 5.3 million square feet when we're finished, he said to the Panasonic executive beside him. Every battery cell produced here drops our cost curve. Every percentage point matters. The Japanese businessman nodded, squinting against the harsh light. Their partnership was still new, the ink barely dry on agreements that would bind their companies together in this ambitious venture. The wind picked up, sending a small dust devil spinning across the construction site. "A factory this size hasn't been built since the days of Ford at River Rouge," the Panasonic executive observed. "This is different," Elon replied quietly. "River Rouge made cars. We're making the future." Later that evening, in the quiet of his hotel suite overlooking the Reno skyline, Elon reviewed the latest production numbers from the Fremont factory on his laptop. The Model S was gaining traction, but not fast enough. Never fast enough. His phone buzzed with a text from JB Straubel, Tesla's chief technical officer and one of the few people who had been with him since the company's earliest days. "Battery pack costs down 8% this quarter. Still not where we need to be." Elon didn't reply immediately. He walked to the window, looking out at the city lights, each one representing electrical power flowing through an antiquated grid. The entire energy infrastructure of America, of the world, needed reinvention. Batteries were just one piece of a larger puzzle. His reflection stared back at him from the glass, a man in his early 40s, the weight of multiple companies etched into the lines around his eyes. He was stretched thin across too many obligations, too many moonshots, and yet he was about to launch more. The boardroom at Tesla's Palo Alto headquarters fell silent as Elon finished presenting his case for acquiring Solar City. It was mid-2016, and the proposed all-stock transaction valued his cousin's company at approximately $2.6 billion. He could see the skepticism on several board members' faces. "You're asking us to approve Tesla acquiring a company where you're the chairman. Your cousins are the executives, and which, frankly, needs cash," said one of the directors, leaning forward. "The conflicts of interest are obvious." Elon nodded, having anticipated this reaction. "I understand how it looks. That's why I'll recuse myself from the vote. But think about what Tesla becomes with this acquisition. Not just an electric car company, an integrated sustainable energy company. Cars, batteries, solar, the entire stack. The room remained quiet, the hum of the air conditioning suddenly noticeable. Solar City isn't just another acquisition, Elon continued, his voice measured but intense. It's a missing piece. We make cars that need charging. We make batteries that store power. The logical next step is generating that power cleanly. He paused. This isn't about bailing out anyone. It's about completing the vision. Later, walking alone through the Tesla factory floor in Fremont, Elon watched the ballet of robots and humans assembling Model S and X vehicles. The former Numi plant, once abandoned by Toyota and GM, now pulsed with a different energy. Workers in safety vests moved purposefully around gleaming machinery, robotic arms pivoted with inhuman precision. His phone buzzed again. A text from Lyndon Reeve, his cousin and Solar City's CEO. Media's already calling it a bailout. CNBC running with conflict of interest story. Elon slipped the phone back into his pocket without responding. The criticism was inevitable. It always came with territory. The market often failed to see connections that were obvious to him, the inexorable logic of integration, of systems thinking. The laboratory in San Francisco was sparse, clinical, and very quiet. Elon sat at a table with a group of neuroscientists and computer engineers, examining prototypes of impossibly thin electrode threads. Each thread is thinner than a human hair, explained one of the scientists, a woman who had left a prestigious university position to join the secret venture. The challenge is insertion without damage to surrounding tissue. Elon nodded, studying the microscopic filaments. And the bandwidth capability? Potentially orders of magnitude beyond current interfaces. But we're years away from human trials. Neuralink had been founded with little fanfare earlier in 2016, operating in near-total secrecy. The goal, creating a high-bandwidth interface between human brains and computers, seemed like science fiction to most. But Elon saw it as an inevitable necessity. The limiting factor in human-computer interaction isn't the machines, he said quietly. It's us. Our input-output rate is medieval. Typing with our fingers, reading with our eyes. It's painfully slow. The team watched him carefully. They'd been drawn to this project by its ambition, by the chance to work on something that might fundamentally alter human capability. We need to move faster, Elon continued. AI development isn't waiting. If we can't find a way to achieve symbiosis, we'll be left behind. Later that same week, in a different warehouse space south of Los Angeles, Elon examined the initial designs for tunnel boring machines. The boring company had begun almost as a joke, a frustrated tweet about traffic, but had quickly crystallized into a legitimate venture. Current tunnel boring technology is stuck in the past, he explained to the small engineering team he'd assembled. They're too slow, too expensive. We need to increase boring speed by at least a factor of 10. An engineer looked up from a laptop. The physics are challenging, heat dissipation alone. Everything looks impossible until it's done, Elon interrupted. Start with first principles. What are the fundamental limits? What assumptions can we challenge? The team exchanged glances, already accustomed to this approach. Break down problems to their atomic level. Question everything. Move fast. As Elon drove back to his Bel Air home that evening, the Los Angeles traffic crawled along the 405 freeway. The irony wasn't lost on him, sitting immobile in the very problem he was trying to solve. His phone rang through the car's speakers. It was Larry Page. Got time to talk? The Google co-founder asked. I'm stuck in traffic, so yes, plenty of time, Elon replied with a hint of weariness. I've been reading about your donation to the Future of Life Institute, Larry said. 10 million to AI safety research. Sounds like you're still worried. Concerned, not worried, Elon corrected. There's a difference. The conversation that followed was cordial, but strained. Their friendship, once close, had cooled as their views on artificial intelligence diverged. Larry saw AI development as fundamentally beneficial, with risks that could be managed. Elon saw existential threats that required aggressive safeguards. The development curve is accelerating, Elon said. We're building something we may not be able to control. That's always been true of technology, Larry countered. Fire, nuclear energy, biotechnology. None of those can decide their own goals, Elon interrupted. AI can and will. That's the difference. The silence that followed spoke volumes about their philosophical divide. When they finally ended the call, Elon felt the distance between them had widened further. The White House meeting room was elegant but understated, with afternoon light streaming through tall windows. President Obama sat across from Elon, flanked by energy policy advisors. It was 2015, and climate change initiatives were a priority for the administration. Your companies represent exactly the kind of innovation we need, Obama said, leaning forward slightly. Clean energy, electric transport, you're building infrastructure for the post-carbon economy. Elon nodded. The technology exists. The challenge is scaling it, making it economically irresistible. And that's where policy can help, one of the advisors interjected. Tax credits, emission standards, research grants. Those are band-aids, Elon said, then paused. Helpful band-aids, but still temporary measures. What we need is a carbon tax, simple, direct, transparent. Obama smiled slightly. You know the political reality of that proposal. I do. But reality has a way of asserting itself eventually. Physics doesn't negotiate. The conversation shifted to electric vehicle adoption, Department of Energy loans, and California's zero-emission vehicle mandates. These policies had helped Tesla in its early, vulnerable days, a fact Elon acknowledged readily. Government and private enterprise could work together effectively when their interests aligned. After the meeting, walking through Washington streets toward his waiting car, Elon found himself thinking about these relationships. He'd benefited from government support while simultaneously pushing against regulatory constraints. It was a complex dance, and one he suspected would become more complicated in the years ahead. Evening had fallen over Hawthorne, California, where the SpaceX headquarters stood illuminated against the darkening sky. In the facility's cafeteria, Elon sat with a small group reviewing design documents for Hyperloop. The concept, passengers traveling in pods through vacuum tubes at near supersonic speeds, had been published as an open-source white paper 2 years earlier. Progress is slower than I'd hoped, admitted an engineer. The technical challenges are significant and without dedicated resources. It was never meant to be my project, Elon interrupted. The idea needed to exist in the world. Someone will build it. Or we license aspects to boring, suggested another team member. The tunneling technology overlaps. Elon nodded thoughtfully. Hyperloop represented his physics' first approach to problem solving. Identify fundamental constraints, challenge assumptions, publish openly. He had too many companies already. He couldn't build everything himself. Later that night in his office, Elon reviewed a draft of a compensation plan that would eventually be proposed to Tesla's board in 2018. The structure was unprecedented. 12 tranches of stock options, each unlocking only if the company reached ambitious market capitalization and operational milestones. From $100 billion to $650 billion in market cap, murmured the compensation consultant who had helped design the plan. No one has ever tied CEO pay to growth targets this aggressive. If we don't hit the milestones, I get nothing, Elon said simply. That's alignment. It's also potentially the largest compensation package in corporate history if all tranches vest. Elon looked up from the document. This isn't about compensation, it's about commitment. I'm all in on Tesla's future. This makes that explicit. The consultant nodded slowly, understanding the message this would send to markets, to shareholders, to employees. Bet on me or get out. The Gigafactory site looked different in the gathering dusk, the construction lights creating islands of harsh brightness against the deepening blue of the Nevada sky. Elon walked the perimeter alone, his footsteps crunching on gravel, his mind working through interconnected problems across his companies. Tesla needed batteries at scale to make electric vehicles affordable. The Gigafactory would provide those batteries, working with Panasonic. Tesla Energy would need those same batteries for Powerwalls and utility storage. Solar City, soon to be Tesla Energy, would generate the power to store in those batteries and charge the vehicles. Integration, vertical integration on a scale not attempted since the industrial giants of the early 20th century. His phone vibrated with an incoming message from SpaceX. Preliminary designs for what would eventually become Starship were ready for review. Another company, another moonshot. Elon looked up at the stars now becoming visible in the darkening sky. There was never enough time, never enough hours in the day to push all these ventures forward. He was living at the edge of what was humanly possible, stretched across companies and continents, existing on too little sleep and too much caffeine. But standing here, seeing the massive outline of the gigafactory taking shape against the landscape, he felt a moment of quiet certainty. The integration was worth the strain. The systems were coming together. The future he had imagined, sustainable energy, multi-planetary existence, safeguarded consciousness, was being built piece by piece. The desert wind picked up again, cool now as night approached. Elon turned and walked back toward the temporary offices, where more decisions waited, more problems needed solutions, more futures needed to be made real. The billionaire with the hands of a builder disappeared into the light. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting the bluish pallor across the factory floor. Elon Musk stood motionless, staring at the production line where robots attempted to assemble Model 3 sedans with varying degrees of success. The Fremont factory stretched around him like a cathedral of ambition, 5.3 million square feet of industrial space filled with the sounds of hydraulics, electric motors, and occasionally human frustration. It was 3:17 a.m. in the spring of 2018. The factory that was supposed to revolutionize automotive manufacturing was instead becoming a monument to hubris. Robots designed to accelerate production had become bottlenecks, their precision advantages overwhelmed by their lack of adaptability. Too much automation, Elon murmured to himself, running a hand through his disheveled hair. Humans are underrated. He hadn't properly slept in the bed for weeks. The narrow leather couch in his office had become home, with showers in the employee locker room and meals consumed while walking the factory floor. His diet consisted primarily of Diet Coke, occasionally supplemented by whatever food an assistant remembered to bring. Dark circles had taken permanent residence beneath his eyes. J.B. Straubel, Tesla's co-founder and CTO, approached with coffee in hand. Unlike Elon, who wore a black t-shirt with jeans that had seen better days, JB maintained a semblance of professional appearance despite the hour. "Production numbers?" Elon asked, accepting the coffee without looking at it. 127 today, JB replied quietly. "Better than yesterday." "We need 5,000 a week," Elon said flatly. "We're burning through $1 million an hour." The silence between them contained multitudes. The weight of 400,000 Model 3 reservations, the scrutiny of Wall Street, and the possibility that Tesla might not survive what Elon had taken to calling production hell. "I'm going to pull the Flufferbot," Elon finally said, referencing a custom-built robot whose sole purpose was placing fiber mats atop battery packs. "It's too precise, too slow. Have a team ready to replace it with manual labor by morning." JB nodded, knowing better than to question the decision. Another piece of the automation dream sacrificed to reality. Later that morning, in the glass-walled conference room that doubled as Elon's sleeping quarters, he scrolled through his phone, scanning the latest Tesla headlines. Jim Chanos, the prominent short seller, had appeared on CNBC, predicting Tesla's imminent collapse. David Einhorn's Greenlight Capital had increased its short position. Together, these hedge fund managers had bet billions that Tesla would fail. Elon's jaw tightened. The shorts, as he called them, weren't just betting against his company. They were actively working to undermine it, planting negative stories, amplifying production difficulties, questioning demand. In Elon's mind, they weren't merely investors with contrary positions. They were enemies. He opened Twitter and began typing. Minutes later, he smiled grimly at the response to his announcement that Tesla would soon sell shorts as merchandise. A taunt aimed directly at those betting against him. The tweet generated thousands of likes within minutes, his digital audience appreciating the combative humor even as Tesla's board members likely winced. The summer sun beat down on the Fremont factory parking lot as Elon paced between buildings. The second quarter of 2018 was ending, and with it would come another earnings report, another opportunity for Tesla's critics to declare the company doomed. Inside his office, he convened with his CFO, Deepak Ahuja, reviewing the financial projections. "If we maintain the current trajectory," Deepak explained, cautious optimism in his voice, "we might be profitable by the third quarter." Elon nodded, allowing himself to contemplate what had seemed impossible months earlier. Profitability would change everything: the narrative, the stock price, perhaps even Tesla's survival. "Make it happen," he said simply, "whatever it takes." The words hung in the air, both a command and a philosophy. Whatever it takes had meant sleeping on the factory floor. Whatever it takes had meant firing executives who couldn't meet impossible standards. Whatever it takes had meant sending all-hands emails decrying meetings as the blight of big companies and creating structures that prioritize production velocity above all else. On August 7, 2018, sitting in his Tesla, Elon typed another tweet, one that would transform his relationship with regulators and reshape Tesla's governance. "I'm considering taking Tesla private at $420. Funding secured." The 14 words sent the stock soaring and triggered immediate questions. The specific price, $420, seemed to some like a cannabis reference, a number chosen partially to amuse his girlfriend at the time. More importantly, the funding secured claim drew intense scrutiny. Elon had indeed had conversations with Saudi Arabia's public investment fund about taking Tesla private. But secured implied something more definitive than what existed, a point the Securities and Exchange Commission would soon make forcefully. 6 weeks later, in the hushed atmosphere of a conference room at Tesla's headquarters, Elon sat across from his legal team. The settlement terms with the SEC were clear: $20 million fine for Elon personally, another $20 million for Tesla, Elon's resignation as chairman, and the implementation of controls requiring pre-approval of his tweets. "This is extortion," he said quietly, the anger evident beneath his controlled tone. "They're trying to silence me." His lawyers exchanged glances, aware that their client was contemplating rejecting the settlement. They had carefully explained the alternatives: a protracted legal battle that would further distract from Tesla's operations and might ultimately result in worse penalties. "The board supports the settlement," the lead counsel reminded him gently. "Tesla needs stability right now, not another fight." Elon stared out the window for a long moment. Finally, he nodded once. He would accept the terms, step down as chairman, but remain CEO. The company would establish a system for reviewing his communications, a system he would subsequently test repeatedly. The autumn of 2018 brought vindication of a sort. Tesla produced nearly 5,000 Model 3s weekly, the production hell receding, if not fully escaped. More importantly, Tesla reported a profit in the third quarter, $312 million, its largest ever. The short sellers who had bet against Tesla were squeezed as the stock price rose. Jim Chanos remained steadfast in his criticism, though the size of his short position reportedly decreased. David Einhorn of Greenlight Capital publicly complained about Tesla's accounting practices. Elon responded by offering to send him a small gift of short shorts to help you through this difficult time. The trolling became part of Tesla law, emblematic of Elon's willingness to engage critics directly rather than through the typical corporate communications filter. The controversies continued to accumulate. In July 2018, when a British cave diver criticized Elon's offer of a mini-submarine to help rescue children trapped in a Thai cave, Elon had impulsively called him a pedo guy on Twitter. The resulting defamation lawsuit dragged into December 2019, when a jury ultimately ruled in Elon's favor. Then there was the Joe Rogan podcast in September 2018, episode number 1169, during which Elon sipped whiskey and when offered, took a single puff of the marijuana cigarette. The moment was captured in screenshots that raced across the internet, adding to the perception of Elon as unpredictable. NASA, concerned about the culture at SpaceX, initiated a workplace review that cost millions and required employees to reaffirm their commitment to a drug-free environment. Through it all, the work continued. At SpaceX, the focus shifted increasingly toward developing Crew Dragon, the spacecraft designed to restore America's ability to launch astronauts to orbit. NASA had been reliant on Russian Soyuz capsules since the space shuttle's retirement in 2011, an arrangement that cost billions and wounded national pride. The winter of 2019 faded into spring, then summer. Tesla stabilized its Model 3 production, introduced the Model Y, and announced plans for factories in China and Germany. The stock price climbed above $300, then retreated, then climbed again, a reflection of both the company's progress and the market's continued uncertainty about its future. Then came 2020, and with it, a pandemic that changed everything. In the early months, as COVID-19 spread globally, Elon expressed skepticism about public health measures. "The coronavirus panic is dumb," he tweeted in March. As lockdowns expanded and Tesla's Fremont factory was ordered closed by Alameda County health officials, his frustration mounted. On May 11, 2020, Elon made a decision that aligned him with political conservatives and libertarians while alienating many progressives. He reopened the Fremont factory in defiance of county orders, daring officials to arrest him. "If anyone is arrested, I ask that it only be me," he tweeted. The county eventually relented, allowing Tesla to operate with safety measures in place. The episode marked a turning point in Elon's public persona, the beginning of a rightward political shift that would accelerate in later years. But the true emotional climax of this period came on May 30, 2020, at Kennedy Space Center's historic Launch Complex 39A, the same pad used for Apollo 11's launch to the moon. The day dawned clear in Florida, the air heavy with humidity and anticipation. Inside the white, sleek Crew Dragon capsule, NASA astronauts Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley sat calmly, checking systems. Below them, the Falcon 9 rocket stood ready, fueled and waiting. In the SpaceX firing room, Elon watched tensely alongside NASA officials. The launch meant everything: validation of SpaceX technology, fulfillment of its founding purpose to reduce the cost of access to space, and restoration of American crewed spaceflight capability. At 3:22 p.m. Eastern Time, the Falcon 9's 9 Merlin engines ignited in a perfect sequence. The rocket lifted slowly at first, then with gathering speed, pushing through the sound barrier and eventually into orbit. Each milestone, max, Q, stage separation, second engine start, orbit insertion, passed without incident. When Dragon successfully separated from the second stage and unfurled its solar arrays, cheers erupted in the firing room. But the mission wasn't over. The spacecraft still needed to autonomously dock with the International Space Station. In the post-launch press conference, Elon struggled to contain his emotions. His voice cracked as he attempted to articulate what the mission meant. "I'm really quite overcome with emotion," he said, pausing to gather himself. "It's been 17 years to get to this point. I think this is something that humanity should be excited about and proud of." The following day, Dragon completed its approach to the ISS, its white form gliding the final meters with precision before docking successfully. America was back in the business of launching humans to orbit, and it had happened through private enterprise, through SpaceX. For Elon, the successful mission represented vindication after years of setbacks, criticism, and near failures. The company he had founded with $100 million of his PayPal fortune had now accomplished what only 3 nations had done before. As 2020 continued, Tesla's stock price soared, eventually making it the most valuable automaker in the world by market capitalization. The production hell of 2018 became a distant memory, though the habits formed during that period, the intensity, the direct intervention in engineering problems, the willingness to sleep at the factory remained part of Elon's approach. Behind the headlines and controversies was a pattern: crisis management through sheer force of will, pragmatic compromises when necessary, and an unrelenting focus on the metrics that mattered: production rate, quality, innovation pace. The public persona might appear erratic and improvisational, but the underlying reality was one of process engineering and constant granular improvement. In the quiet hours when the factory noise faded and most employees had gone home, Elon often found himself alone with the machines, the robots that assembled cars and the cars themselves, embodiments of years of design decisions and engineering trade-offs. In those moments, the stock price, the short sellers, the SEC, and the Twitter controversies seemed distant, less real somehow than the physical manifestation of what Tesla had built. What remained was the work itself. The pursuit of electric transport, sustainable energy, and multi-planetary human existence. Everything else was, in his view, distraction. And if weathering production hell, battling regulators, and occasionally crossing lines in public discourse was the price of progress, it was a price he had repeatedly shown himself willing to pay. The autumn wind swept across the Texas plains, carrying the scent of mesquite and ambition as Elon Musk gazed out from the balcony of his modest Austin residence. The city lights twinkled below, a constellation of earthbound stars that seemed to mirror the cosmic patterns he'd spent his life pursuing. It was late 2021, and the universe had aligned in ways even he couldn't have predicted. 1 trillion, he whispered to himself, the words disappearing into the night. Tesla had crossed the threshold that afternoon, joining a rarefied club of companies worth more than $1 trillion. His phone buzzed incessantly with congratulatory messages, but he let them accumulate unanswered. The moment felt too consequential for digital pleasantries. His personal valuation had surged past $300 billion, cresting near $340 billion as November progressed, more wealth than any individual in modern history had ever accumulated, at least on paper. The numbers themselves had become abstractions, digital configurations that represented something else entirely, validation perhaps, or vindication. Earlier that year, he had hosted Saturday Night Live, a cultural milestone that had unexpectedly revealed a more vulnerable side of himself. "I'm actually making history tonight as the first person with Asperger's to host SNL," he had told the audience. The admission had been calculated but genuine, a rare combination in his public persona. His appearance had consequences beyond personal revelation. A throwaway joke during the Weekend Update segment had sent Dogecoin plummeting, erasing billions in market value within minutes. "Yeah, it's a hustle," he had said with a smirk about the cryptocurrency he'd been championing. Markets, he was learning, responded to his words with increasingly volatile sensitivity. Inside his sparsely furnished living room, Franz, Tesla's design chief, was waiting with renderings for upcoming models. The relocation to Texas had been practical. No state income tax, business-friendly regulations, but also symbolic. California, with its progressive politics and pandemic restrictions, had begun to feel constraining. "The tax bill just came in," Elon mentioned as he returned inside. "About $11 billion, probably the largest individual payment in American history." Franz whistled. "Worth it to shut up the critics." "It was never about them," Elon replied, though they both knew this wasn't entirely true. The decision to sell roughly $16 billion in Tesla stock had been partly motivated by an expiring options package, but also by growing public resentment of billionaire tax avoidance. The move to Texas had already raised eyebrows. The stock sale and subsequent tax payment were the countermove in a complex game of public perception chess. The winter of 2021 bled into 2022, and with it came a fixation that would alter his empire's architecture. Twitter had long been his preferred communication channel, a digital megaphone through which he moved markets, announced products, picked fights, and occasionally sabotaged his own interests. His tweet from 2020 Tesla stock price is too high emo had instantly erased billions in market value, demonstrating both his influence and his impulsivity. Now he wanted ownership, not just influence. The platform had become too essential to his brand, too integral to his company's narratives, to leave in others' hands. In April 2022, He made his move, $44 billion for complete control. "You're paying a premium," warned Jared Birchall, his wealth manager and trusted lieutenant, as they sat in Elon's kitchen over cups of cooling coffee. "It's not about the financial return," Elon replied, eyes focused on some distant calculation. "It's about protecting the future." The deal's announcement sent tremors through Silicon Valley. What followed was corporate drama worthy of Shakespeare. Accusations about bot counts, attempted withdrawal, a Delaware Chancery court case that threatened to force his hand, and finally, reluctant capitulation. On October 27, 2022, Elon Musk entered Twitter's San Francisco headquarters carrying a sink, a visual pun for social media. Let that sink in, that doubled as foreshadowing. Within hours, CEO Parag Agrawal, CFO Ned Siegel, and Policy Chief Vijaya Gadde were escorted from the building, their access badges deactivated. The headquarters transformed overnight. Conference rooms became bedrooms. Engineers slept on floors. Ultimatums went out: be hardcore or leave, and within weeks, nearly 80% of the staff was gone, reduced from approximately 7,500 to 1,500. "They said it couldn't run with less than 7,000 people," Elon remarked to a small circle of loyal engineers who had remained. "We'll prove them wrong." The rebranding to X in July 2023 was the final severance from Twitter's past. The blue bird logo painted over on the headquarters building, replaced with a minimalist X that symbolized his larger ambitions for an everything app. Advertisers fled as content moderation policies shifted, revenue plummeted, Fidelity marked down its investment by roughly 70%. Through it all, Tesla continued its expansion. The numbers were staggering: approximately $81.5 billion in revenue for 2022, with $12.6 billion in net income, growing to roughly $96.8 billion in revenue, with $15 billion in net income for 2023. SpaceX was adding its own considerable weight to his portfolio, with 2023 revenue approaching $9 billion, about $5 billion from Starlink's growing satellite internet service, and $4 billion from launches. On a crisp morning in late 2023, Elon stood in a conference room at X headquarters, addressing the newly formed XAI team. The artificial intelligence startup represented his response to what he viewed as concerning developments at OpenAI, a company he had co-founded in 2015 but left in 2018 over disagreements about its direction. "Grok will be different," he explained, referring to their developing chatbot. "It won't refuse questions due to political sensitivities. It won't shy away from humor or controversy." The team nodded appreciatively. They understood the mission: position XAI as the antidote to what Elon increasingly called the woke mind virus he believed was infecting Silicon Valley's AI development. Trained partially on X's data, Grok would be sarcastic, straightforward, and willing to venture where other AI systems feared to tread. As 2023 progressed, his digital persona became increasingly polarizing. "My pronouns are prosecute Fauci," he tweeted during the pandemic's waning days, embracing the culture wars with an enthusiasm that alienated progressive Tesla customers while endearing him to new conservative allies. He sparred publicly with the Anti-Defamation League, reinstated previously banned accounts on X, and found himself at odds with Brazilian authorities over content decisions. The wealth that had defined his 2021 peak fluctuated but remained extraordinary. His Tesla stake had declined to approximately 13%, but his SpaceX ownership held steady at around 42%, now valued at roughly $108 billion as a private company. The Boring Company, approximately $7 billion, and Neuralink, approximately $5 billion, added modest sums to the equation, while X Corporation suffered significant markdowns from its acquisition price. One evening, as summer turned to fall in 2023, Elon sat alone in his Austin home, reviewing the carbon removal enterprise he had launched with a $100 million commitment. Philanthropy had become a more significant focus. $5.7 billion in Tesla stock donated to a donor-advised fund in 2021, funding for Texas schools, water filters for Flint, Michigan back in 2018. His phone lit up with a message from Linda Yaccarino, the NBC Universal executive he had installed as the nominal CEO of X while maintaining operational control. Advertisers still hesitant, her message read. They want content assurances. He set the phone down without replying. The platform's transformation had cost him approximately $30 billion in advertiser value, but he seemed unconcerned. The mathematics of his wealth made such losses almost philosophical rather than practical. The asset landscape had shifted beneath him. His long-standing partnership with Panasonic on batteries was winding down by 2023, replaced by Tesla's increasing vertical integration. The Toyota relationship had ended years earlier, in 2017. Meanwhile, SpaceX ties to NASA had deepened through the Commercial Crew Program and Artemis lunar initiatives. In December 2023, as the year drew to a close, Elon gathered his closest advisors at his Texas residence. The room contained representatives from each kingdom in his empire: Tesla, SpaceX, xAI, Boring, Neuralink. "We're entering a new phase," he told them, his voice steady but intense. "The platforms we've built are becoming the foundation for what comes next." No one asked what next meant. They had learned that Elon's horizon extended further than most could comprehend. The conversation turned to practical matters: SpaceX's Starship development, Tesla's expanding manufacturing footprint, xAI's computing requirements, X regulatory challenges. After the others had left, Elon remained in his chair, contemplating the complexity of the machinery he had set in motion. The trillion-dollar valuation of 2021 seemed almost quaint now, a milestone passed on a journey without a clear destination. His wealth had made him the main character in capitalism's contemporary narrative, beloved by retail investors who viewed him as their champion, reviled by critics who saw him as emblematic of inequality's extremes. Outside, the Texas night was clear and cold, stars visible in a way they rarely were in California. He stepped onto his balcony and looked up, searching for Mars in the night sky. The red planet was invisible tonight, but he knew precisely where it would be. His companies had become the vehicles for his ambitions, but those ambitions had always been cosmic in scale, making humanity multiplanetary, transitioning the world to sustainable energy, interfacing the human mind with artificial intelligence. The digital battles, the market volatility, the cultural skirmishes, these were mere features of the landscape he navigated, not the destination itself. As 2023 drew to a close, Elon Musk stood at the convergence point of technology, capital, and influence. His empire spanned Earth and reached toward space. His wealth fluctuated by billions based on market sentiment, and his voice echoed through platforms used by hundreds of millions. Yet in quiet moments like this, looking up at the stars from his Texas home, he still saw himself primarily as an engineer solving problems, just on a scale that had outgrown most people's comprehension. The trillion-dollar valuations and $100 billion wealth were means rather than ends, resources for the larger mission that had driven him since his youth. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of mesquite once again. Another year was ending, another beginning. The machinery of his empire would continue its relentless operation while he plotted the next acceleration, the next integration, the next frontier. Sleep could wait. There was still too much to build. The stainless steel rocket gleamed under the Texas sun, reflecting the light in shimmering waves that danced across its surface. Starship stood on the launch pad at Starbase like a monument to ambition, a tower of possibility reaching 120 meters into the blue sky. Elon Musk watched from the control center, his eyes fixed on the monitors, fingers tapping an unconscious rhythm on the edge of the console. T-minus 60 seconds, came the call over the comms. March 14, 2024. Test flight, IFT-3. The third integrated flight test of the vehicle meant to carry humanity beyond Earth's orbit to establish a permanent presence on Mars. The previous attempts had ended in spectacular explosions, learning opportunities, as Elon preferred to call them. Expensive learning opportunities. T-minus 30 seconds. He reached for his Diet Coke, the condensation cool against his fingers. The familiar bitter taste grounded him as the countdown continued. Around him, engineers watched their stations with the focused intensity of people who understood the physics, the mathematics, the countless calculations that had brought them to this moment. T-10, 9, 8. Elon's phone buzzed. He ignored it. 3, 2, 1. The engines ignited, and Starship began its ascent, climbing slowly at first, then with increasing speed as the massive super-heavy booster pushed against gravity with the force of controlled fury. The vibrations could be felt even in the control room, a distant thunder that resonated in the chest. "Look at that thrust vectoring," someone murmured. Elon said nothing, his expression a study in contained intensity. The rocket climbed higher, passing through Max Q, the point of maximum aerodynamic pressure. Then came stage separation, the super-heavy booster detaching as planned, Starship continuing its journey upward on its own power. "We've reached space," announced the flight director. A cheer went up around the room, but Elon's celebration was merely a slight relaxation of his shoulders. Space was only one milestone. The true test would be the controlled descent, the re-entry, the landing. The economics of Mars colonization depended on reusability. "All telemetry data looking good," reported one of the engineers. "We're capturing everything." Hours later, as the Texas night settled around Starbase, Elon sat alone in his modest rental home nearby. The test had ended with the loss of the vehicle during re-entry, not unexpected, but disappointing nonetheless. Yet they had achieved space, collected crucial data, learned valuable lessons about the heat shield, about the control systems. He scrolled through the preliminary analysis on his laptop, the blue light illuminating his features in the darkened room. His phone rang. Gwynne Shotwell, SpaceX's president and COO, his operational right-hand for nearly 20 years. "The FAA called," she said when he answered. "They're pleased with the data. They're indicating we might be able to increase our test cadence." "About time," Elon replied, his voice carrying the weight of fatigue and frustration. "How soon?" "Potentially within 6 to 8 weeks for the next test, if we can implement the necessary changes." He nodded to himself. 6 weeks, we'll do it in 5. After the call ended, Elon stepped outside onto the small porch of his rental. The night air carried the salt of the Gulf, and in the distance, he could see the lights of the Starbase facility. Mars felt simultaneously closer and further away than ever. The timeline had shifted from his once optimistic predictions to a more sober, maybe 2030s assessment. But Mars remained the endpoint, the goal that pulled him forward through the increasing complexities of his empire. Tesla, SpaceX, Neuralink, the Boring Company, XAI, an empire valued somewhere between $195 and $250 billion, depending on the day's stock fluctuations. The vast majority illiquid, tied up in company equity. His phone buzzed again. A text from Jared Birchall, who ran his family office, Accession LLC. A message about the ongoing court case challenging the 2018 Tesla compensation package, a plan potentially worth up to $56 billion, now partially voided by a Delaware judge who called it excessive and questioned the board's independence. "We need to talk about the appeal strategy," the message read, "and the shareholder revote." Elon texted back a terse acknowledgement. The compensation package was more than money. It was validation of a vision, of years spent pushing Tesla from near bankruptcy to industry leadership. The company had delivered 1.81 million vehicles in 2023, employed around 140,000 people globally. Numbers that represented real change in the automotive landscape, a shift towards sustainable transport that many had deemed impossible. The next morning, at the Starbase facility, Elon met with the engineering team. Maps and technical drawings covered the conference room walls, and a disassembled component lay on the table like a patient in surgery. "The heat shield tile separated during re-entry," explained the lead thermal engineer, pointing to the failure point. "We're redesigning the attachment mechanism and altering the tile geometry here and here." Elon nodded, absorbing the information. occasionally asking pointed questions that revealed his intimate knowledge of the system's design. This was where he felt most at home, in the technical details, in the physics and engineering challenges that could be solved through iteration and first principles. "What about the grid fins?" he asked. The telemetry showed excessive vibration before signal loss. "We're stiffening the mounting structure," another engineer explained, "and modifying the control algorithms to account for the aerodynamic instabilities we observed." The meeting continued for 3 hours, diving deep into technical minutiae. No executives, no PowerPoints, just engineers and problems and solutions. When they finally emerged, Elon checked his phone to find several missed calls from Alex Spiro, his attorney. "The SEC is asking questions again," Spiro told him when he returned the call, "about your ex-post regarding Tesla production numbers." Elon's jaw tightened. The Securities and Exchange Commission had been a persistent antagonist since the 2018 funding secured tweet and subsequent settlement that required certain Tesla-related communications to be pre-approved. "What exactly are they claiming now?" he asked, walking toward the Starship production facility, where stainless steel segments waited to become the next test vehicle. "They're suggesting your March 2nd post about quarterly deliveries constitutes material information that should have been filed officially first." "That's absurd," Elon replied. "It was already public information. Send them the press release timestamps." The relationship with regulators had grown increasingly adversarial. The SEC, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, questioning Tesla's autopilot and full self-driving systems, the FAA's methodical pace with Starship testing authorizations. All of them, in Elon's view, bureaucratic impediments to innovation, to progress. That evening, Elon attended a virtual board meeting for xAI, his artificial intelligence startup founded in 2023. The company was rapidly raising capital, positioning itself as a challenger to OpenAI, Anthropic, and other frontier AI labs. The timing was critical. ChatGPT's release in November 2022 had triggered an arms race in the industry. With compute resources, data, and talent becoming increasingly scarce and expensive, "We need to accelerate our compute acquisition," Elon told the board. "The training runs for our next model will require at least double our current capacity." On screen, the board members nodded. Most were longtime allies, people who understood his vision and management style, who wouldn't balk at the aggressive timelines or resource requirements. "The funding round is oversubscribed," reported the CFO. "We can close at a $20 billion valuation if you approve." Elon considered this. xAI was still early in its development, but the valuation reflected the potential he saw in creating AI systems aligned with human values, or at least his interpretation of those values. The woke mind virus, as he called it, had infected too many existing AI systems. xAI would be different. Close it, he decided, and expedite the hardware orders. Later that night, after a brief video call with the Neuralink team to discuss their first human implant, a paralyzed patient now able to control a cursor with thought, Elon sat at his desk, scrolling through his X feed. His public pronouncements had grown increasingly political over the preceding months. He had officially endorsed Trump for the 2024 election, donated to conservative PACs, and regularly amplified right-wing commentators. The shift had alienated former allies in Silicon Valley and the climate movement, but had endeared him to a new coalition of supporters. Texas oil money, defense contractors, free speech absolutists, and political populists who saw him as a champion against elite consensus. His finger hovered over a draft post criticizing the Biden administration's labor policies, particularly their support for unionization efforts at Tesla plants. He sent it, then took another sip of Diet Coke. The clock on his laptop showed 1:47 a.m. On his desk sat a small collection of items that hinted at the contradictions of his existence. An Estes model rocket, a replica MP5 submachine gun, engineering textbooks like Sutton's, rocket propulsion elements, and a Mars globe with potential landing sites marked in red. Objects of ambition, power, knowledge, and possibility. His phone rang again. Omid Afshar, his production troubleshooter who moved between Tesla and SpaceX as needed. The battery cell yield numbers from Giga Texas are in, Omid reported. We're at 89% now, trending toward the 92% target. Not good enough, Elon replied. We need 95% minimum for the cost curve we projected. What's the failure mode analysis show? They discussed technical details for 20 minutes before Elon ended the call. He walked to the window of his modest home and looked out at the Texas night. In the distance, the silhouette of Starship on the pad was visible, illuminated by floodlights. The empire he had built was sprawling yet precarious. Tesla faced increasing competition from Chinese manufacturers and traditional automakers, finally taking electric vehicles seriously. SpaceX had Starlink with over 2 million subscribers, but the capital requirements for maintaining the satellite constellation while developing Starship were enormous. X, purchased for $44 billion, was still searching for a sustainable business model and the path to becoming the everything app he envisioned. And then there were the newer ventures. Neuralink with its brain-computer interfaces, the Boring Company with its tunnels, and now XAI joining the artificial intelligence race. Most billionaires diversified as their wealth grew: real estate portfolios, bond holdings, index funds, art collections. Elon had done the opposite, concentrating his resources into his companies, into his vision of the future. His wealth was almost entirely illiquid, tied to stock prices and private company valuations that could fluctuate wildly. The Musk Foundation, with assets reported at around $470 million in 2021, represented his formal philanthropic efforts, though critics pointed out that his lifetime giving amounted to less than 1% of his net worth. His response to such criticism was consistent: building sustainable energy infrastructure and making life multiplanetary was the philanthropy. The next morning brought news that the test data from IFT-3 had yielded a critical insight into the re-entry heating patterns. Engineers were already redesigning components for the next test vehicle. We've identified the thermal weak point, the lead engineer explained, showing Elon the simulation results. With this modification, we believe we can survive re-entry intact on the next flight. Elon studied the data, nodding slowly. How quickly can we implement this and be ready for the next launch? 5 weeks, minimum, came the reply. Make it 4, Elon said, already moving to the next problem. In a video conference later that day, Elon spoke with Steve Davis, president of the Boring Company. The Vegas Loop, a system of tunnels beneath the Las Vegas Convention Center, carrying passengers in Tesla vehicles, was operational but modest in scale compared to the original vision of 3D urban transit networks. We need a major project that demonstrates the full potential, Elon said. The Vegas system is a proof of concept, but it's not revolutionary enough. We're in discussions with 3 cities, Davis replied, but regulatory approvals are the bottleneck. Environmental impact studies alone take 18-24 months. Elon's frustration was palpable. That's exactly the problem. It shouldn't take 2 years of paperwork to start digging. This is why infrastructure never improves. After the call, Elon drove his Tesla to the SpaceX cafeteria for a late lunch, nodding to employees who had grown accustomed to his presence. He sat alone, reviewing documents on his phone while eating quickly, efficiently. Food was fuel, not pleasure. A notification appeared. Another interview request. This one from a prominent climate scientist who had once been an ally, but had recently criticized his political shift in association with climate skeptics. Elon declined the request with a swipe of his finger. The alliance between his companies and the environmental movement had frayed. In his view, he was still doing more for climate action through Tesla's electric vehicles and energy products than any activist or politician, regardless of his political statements or associations. That evening, as the Texas sun set in a blaze of orange and purple, Elon walked the Starbase grounds. Engineers and technicians nodded respectfully as he passed. He stopped occasionally to ask questions or examine components, his hands touching the metal, his mind calculating, evaluating. In the distance, the Gulf of Mexico reflected the fading light. Somewhere across that water and beyond lay the future he envisioned, a sustainable Earth powered by solar energy and batteries. and a second branch of human civilization on Mars, an insurance policy for the species. Back in his office, Elon reviewed the latest Tesla autopilot data. Full self-driving remained elusive, progressing, but not yet achieving the robotaxi vision he had promised investors. The recursive neural networks were improving with each iteration, with each million miles of real-world driving data, but edge cases persisted. His phone buzzed with a text from Kimball, his brother and Tesla board ally, a personal message about family, a brief connection to the world outside the empire. As midnight approached, Elon remained at his desk, working through a stack of technical documents. The Starship timeline, Tesla's manufacturing challenges, Neuralink's next implant candidate, xAI's compute requirements, problems and solutions, calculations and decisions, all flowing through the nexus of his attention. On the wall hung a simple framed photograph. The first successful Falcon 1 launch in 2008, the rocket that saved SpaceX when the company had weeks of cash remaining. A reminder of how close he had come to failure and how far he had traveled since. The future remained uncertain. Would Starship achieve reliable orbital reuse? Would Tesla maintain its lead in the increasingly competitive EV market? Would xAI catch up to the AI frontrunners? Would Neuralink's brain interfaces scale beyond experimental procedures? The questions were many, the variables complex, the outcomes impossible to predict with certainty. But the desired endpoint remained clear. He made life multiplanetary, was the obituary headline he worked toward, the legacy he pursued with single-minded focus. For now, though, there was only the next problem to solve, the next test to run, the next design to iterate. Mars would wait. It had waited for billions of years, but not, Elon Musk believed, for much longer. In every generation, there comes a mind that refuses to stay within the lines. Elon Musk is that mind. Restless, flawed, relentless. He doesn't just chase progress, he drags it forward even when the world resists. He gambled his fortune on ideas that seemed absurd. Electric cars, reusable rockets, colonizing Mars. But somehow, the absurd became real. And in the process, he rewrote what it means to dream in the modern age. He built companies that rise and fall on his words. But his greatest creation isn't Tesla or SpaceX, it's momentum. The belief that one person, driven by vision and obsession, can change the direction of an entire species. Musk lives between brilliance and breakdown, between inspiration and exhaustion. And yet, he keeps going, because for him, the finish line isn't wealth or power. It's a world that no longer fears the impossible. Whether you admire him or question him, Elon Musk has already altered the course of history. And his story is far from over, because the next great chapter, the one written on Mars or whispered through artificial minds, might still carry his name. Thank you for watching Richie Rich Stories. If you believe that the future belongs to those who build it, subscribe, share this story, and let world know what you think of Elon Musk and his story in the comments. And keep chasing your own impossible. Because sometimes the richest thing you can create is tomorrow itself.